Sup, nerds? We have a guest, probably my single most requested guest since I started the show way back. Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself quick?
Oh, hey, I'm Ryan Carniato. I'm the creator of SolidJS. I work on open source at Netlify. I don't know, that's the official introduction at least.
Good stuff. Yeah, I am so hyped. Obviously, Netlify is a great place for you to be at with the focus on all sorts of open source frameworks, especially, of course, Solid. Something I don't think a lot of people know about you, okay, a lot of us do, to be clear, but generally speaking, I don't think enough people have an appreciation for how deep your knowledge of frameworks is outside of Solid. Love to hear a bit about how you got into frameworks in the first place and what led you to starting Solid.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's not really funny. It's just I was working at a startup, and the startup I happened to be working for a guy who had created his own JavaScript framework. It was Knockback, which is like a knockout backbone thing, which is actually like kind of okayly big in its day. It had like over 1,000 GitHub stars back in like 2011 or 12. So like that
That's like
that was
half of
something.
GitHub users.
Yeah, like that back then that was a thing, you know. Um, but yeah, in any case, I found myself in open source through that, and he actually kind of I don't know if burnout's the right term, but like he was kind of done at a certain point, and I found myself maintaining a bunch of open source projects and being like the highest technical person on that in that startup, right, small team. So I actually wanted to kind of like replace what we were doing. And I mean, you might be like, oh, okay, like this is like 2015. You're like, oh yeah, let's like switch to React. The problem is our team had been building everything on Knockout, and we had built our own ORM, kind of similar to GraphQL ourselves, kind of back in 2012, 13. So you can picture like the whole thing was all like intertwined together and really tightly coupled. And we actually kind of liked this paradigm from Knockout called reactivity. So we didn't want to actually move off that, except the problem was Knockout was basically dead. People stopped maintaining it, and it just kind of like slowly evaporated. So at some point, I was like, I'm going to try and make a modern version of Knockout, and I just started playing away with it. But a lot of that motivation also came from the fact that like I kept on seeing like all these videos, and like I watched all this kind of popular streams and conference talks that one would watch at that time, and people were kept on like showing like the virtual DOM is so fast and all this kind of stuff. Like Ryan Florence had this like great demo where he had like a stock ticker, and it was like spamming the page super fast. And I'm like, I've never built that app. To be fair, I built media, like it was like a private Instagram kind of thing, and I was used to for schools. It was in education, and I was used to like data grids, like image grids and like moving stuff around, video, like all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I'm never like spamming a stock ticker. And, I thought reactivity was fast. So without being too long-winded, I've started building this in my free time because I was also found as being like the highest technical person. No one wanted me to code anymore. They wanted me to like explain and do business stuff and hire people. So I found my ability to go back into coding by working on this framework in my spare time. And eventually I open sourced it to get into benchmarks because the performance was really good. And I wanted to prove something. And it's kind of funny to me because ultimately that startup, I actually directed them to Preact, and then it was right around Preact 10 and it was a little unstable. So the startup's on React now, just in case anyone was curious. But it was a good experience for me. And because of when I got into benchmarking, I actually played with like every framework. Like I did a whole bunch of different comparisons and like trying them all and seeing what they were doing and why they were fast here and whatnot. And
For anyone who
eventually,
doesn't know, Ryan here has rewritten Hacker News in probably 10 frameworks and like tech stacks at this point. Like the amount of Hacker News clones in Remix and SvelteKit in Next.js and the new Next.js release and DIY and crazy things, obviously SolidStart, Astro plus Solid, to show like not just like a quick perf demo, like rendering a bunch of stuff, but actually how things behave as you interact on a page.
yeah. Sorry, I get long-winded at times, but like
Don't be
I
sorry. I
bet.
just wanted to call that out for the audience. So like I wanted to like emphasize just how deep your knowledge and understanding of these things is. We see Anthony in chat now saying that you're probably the only person alive who's used all of the frameworks. He had a comment earlier that was you're undoubtedly the premier expert on JavaScript frameworks, which is a funny title, completely true and badass, which it is. You're the person who knows the most about the most frameworks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny how you end up there when you're like trying to just find like the best ways of doing things. I did go really deep, and it's the thing that was amusing to me is that my old startup, I built the whole framework off web components because we can like decided that we needed a component model to get out of our like MVVM soup, so to speak. And I built Solid on web components as well. And then at a certain point, I was benchmarking and doing stuff. I was like, why are the web components here? And I just like ripped them out. And when I ripped them out, I was like, I don't actually need the components. And that was actually the advent of where the thinking really got to, because I realized I was like, components like were not necessary at runtime. And that was kind of the revelation. And it was good for me because hooks came out sometime around then. And suddenly like we had this whole ecosystem of like class components and plain objects. And suddenly React was like, no, make these primitives again. And I mean, that was the best moment for me, like ever you can imagine, because like Solid already looked like hooks before hooks came out. And we were using JSX, because I like the portability. And like suddenly React was like, yeah, do it like this. And then I was like, oh, okay. What if we do it like this, but maybe better? So like it was really interesting because a combination of like a bunch of, I don't know, different things and just keeping on looking into stuff and exploring it kind of led me to understanding, the nature of components and frameworks, the nature of interaction and scaling this stuff. And that's actually how I've had such a crazy 2 years, because the guys at eBay headhunted me because they realized inadvertently I'd also solved hydration. So it was kind of like a really interesting time, because they're like, yes, we need to get rid of the components because we don't want to ship all these components to the browser. And I don't know how familiar people with hydration is, probably like the most misunderstood term in web dev. But like essentially, if we can break the JavaScript smaller, again, that's how we can send less JavaScript, get faster page loads and all that stuff. So I actually worked with them for a couple of years. And honestly, if anyone ever gets the chance to try it, and I am hoping soon, because we've been working on it for a long time, the Marco team at eBay is like, that's where I get my like future league thing. Like they're building stuff like 8 years ahead of everyone else. They had like out of order streaming and islands and partial hydration stuff like in 2013 or 14 or something. Like and pictured like having that like back then, and like having the last 8 years to think about it. Like that's bigger than the gap between jQuery and React. Like in terms of like when things are released, like having that period to like noodle on that and then have it test in production, like with eBay, like those guys are absolutely crazy. And so I learned a lot from them. And I, while I was doing that, Solid just kept on picking up and picking up and picking up. And, I found myself now in Netlify working on Solid and other open source. But the best part about Netlify was I get to keep my ties with Marco and with Quick and with Astro. Like I spend a lot of time with these teams in their Discord and talking about stuff. And, like I built the first Quick router, when I was making a demo for them. And, it benchmarks, because when you have new technology, how do you showcase it? Like these are really places where we need to figure out how to highlight technical innovation. And like, don't get me wrong, like when you're on that front end, not everyone needs to adopt this stuff. Like, don't worry too much about it. You're perfectly fine where you are in your stack. But on the other hand, I think it's interesting to see the shift of the fundamentals of the web kind of move around, that like we're looking at different primitives. And like that's what excites me about Solid, because we'll see. I don't know how things will go in the future, but the impact of the work that I've been doing I'm already seeing dividends across the ecosystem, which is amazing. Seeing stuff like pre-act signals, seeing stuff like Angular of all are looking at bringing signals in. Looking like one of the guys on the Angular team tweeted that signals was the new VDOM, and I was like, well, like in terms of the exploration there. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, Theo's just letting me keep talking, but I think that like when I spent so much time on these fundamentals, on these primitives, that we haven't even cashed in on the full potential value, right? People see SolidJS, which is another UI framework like many others, but when they see it, they go, oh, it looks like React. But that's also because it was built that way. Solid doesn't actually need to be that way. It just happened to make a nice React the way it looks. But the truth of the matter is the power is in these primitives, and we can build different things. And I think we're only just starting to see the potential that we unlock in the future as we like explore this further.
I absolutely love that. I obviously have been paying attention for a long time personally. I remember when I first saw on Hacker News new JSX framework faster than Svelte, and I immediately looked in, reached out, and have kept an eye on what you do since. There's a thing I've been talking a lot more about on stream lately. It's like a philosophical thing, because I get a lot of questions that are like, Theo, how do you know about all these things? Like, how do you keep finding these things so early and keeping up with all the news? And the response I always give is, I don't think about the things. I don't follow a project. I follow the people. When I see a piece of technology that I'm impressed by, like Solid, I don't just follow the Solid Twitter account. I follow Ryan's Twitter account to see what he's talking about. I think you specifically are the reason why I push this so hard, because the amount your interest in all of these things as they happen and your understanding of like both extremes, where there are the people who still ship jQuery and there's the people who are inventing Marco, and your ability to be on that whole spectrum and see how things move up and down it has allowed me as an engineer to grow absurd amounts absurdly quick. And a lot of why I'm seen as an expert is because I take the things I learned from you and see you talking about and just share them with my own audience.
Thank you for saying that. That brings me joy, because like, how should I put it? It's funny. I love the jQuery comparison to like Marco, because both of those things are powering the biggest e-commerce sites in the world. And this is like, you put it in perspective. Like Marco powers eBay, but jQuery powers Amazon.com. Like, and it's interesting to see the whole scale, like, and the difference between that and the similarities. Like, I think people are often very quick to kind of go, oh, my solution's special or different. And I think that's good, because that's what motivates people and keeps them pushing forward. But I think the similarities are often the more interesting thing. But even more further to your point, I'm very stoked to be here today, because the truth of the matter is, it's difficult sometimes to express all these ideas. Like, some people, I stream quite often, like 5-hour streams or whatever, and it's like dense. People are telling me like, I can't listen to your stream in the background. I literally need like the pause and resume, like think a minute, resume. And I'm not trying it. It's my opportunity to get a bunch of stuff off my head or learn a bunch of stuff. And I think the work that yourself, in particular, among others, is doing to actually be able to propagate these like more advanced topics and better understanding is invaluable. Like my biggest problem, I told everyone the last 2 years have been like kind of whirlwind for me. I got picked up by eBay and I started working on these projects. I was also not on social media. I was not on Twitter. I was not on LinkedIn. I was not doing any of this stuff. I was just working on my startup, head down, doing my thing. And when I came in to social media, it was actually challenging. I didn't know how to express my ideas and whatever number of characters Twitter has. And I'd see discussions and I'd be like, oh yeah, actually I have something to add to this discussion, or try and talk to it. And it was very difficult. No one wanted to listen, and I just didn't understand how these dynamics work. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are much more natural and have that natural ability to communicate it. Because the problem was, after a while, I've realized I was hitting myself against the wall. I focused more on education, writing more articles and more streams. But there's going to be a limited audience for the stuff I do. So I very much depend on stuff, as I said, like yourself, Jack Harrington, and a few others who actually take those ideas much further and to a much wider audience than I could ever hope to.
Absolutely. I think you're getting more and more accessible, and at the same way that like I'm taking the information that you are taking and making it more accessible, I think that another thing that people like Primogen and I are doing is we're leveling up the audience for tech content, as well as proving to an existing audience that doesn't watch tech videos and YouTube and such. How do I put it? Wordsworth is hard. It feels like we are leveling up the audience and identifying an audience that would watch your content. We've built the funnel to it, and you've built the funnel for the concepts themselves for us to find and bring. It's like a very like symbiotic thing in that way, where we are using the stuff you teach us to level up our audience and ourselves, and our audience leveling up makes your content and your way of doing things more accessible to those same people. And on that note, and on the note of listening to you, I want to make sure everybody here knows that you're actually also a streamer. One of the first ones I was watching when I started getting into the dev stuff. And I want to make sure that everybody here is following you if they're not for some reason. So I'm going to quickly shout out. It's Ryan Solid on Twitch, right?
Yeah, Ryan Solid.
Ryan Solid, cool. Just did a shout out. Everybody here, if for some reason you're not following Ryan yet, please fix that. His content's incredible. I saw somebody in chat saying, can I have you on as a permanent guest? Why would I do that when you can watch his show? That's even better.
Thank you. But I've been streaming since last August, so like a year and 3 months or something. And it was such a funny thing. I mean, and this is good. We should talk about this because this is how we met, essentially. You said you'd seen Solid, on a Hacker News thing, but what had happened for me, at least, it was at a certain point I realized that I needed to kick up my content game a bit. What had happened was I told you, no one understood anything I said on Twitter. And, someone even said that I was like self-promoting and stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm not in the right place. So I started focusing more on my articles. And then people are like, oh, I love your articles, but I don't learn this way. I learn by video. And that was new to me. I'm a little bit older, if you guys don't know. I did not come up like in that, but it's increasingly more common to see that people learn by video content. I think, and I was like, okay, well, sure, I can talk about some stuff. And people are like, oh, it'd be really cool if you like went line by line through the Solid compiler or something. So I did that, actually. That was my first video. But I'm not good at video production or know any of that stuff. So I found like, StreamYard or something simple, and I just like streamed. And it's like, I look at those videos and I laugh at like how bad the quality was. It's like this blurry mess. My head was like disappearing like while I was talking. And like it was, but the thing was, it was after work. Friday night, 8 p.m., and I just like start streaming. And it was the same way I started writing articles. When I first started writing articles, there's literally like I remember opening and be like, oh, 6 people viewed the article. And this like on Medium, like I was like usually like random traffic will get you that much, like, or more. Like I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna keep on writing. No one's there, but one day, maybe this will help someone. Same thing with the streams. I just started like picking these complex topics that like no one knew about, talked about hydration, talked about rendering, all this stuff, and just every Friday 8 p.m. And before long I had about 20 people who were like pretty regular on this stream, and it was all YouTube. I didn't know Twitch or anything, so it was just kind of funny. And I remember I started trying to figure out how to teach ideas, and like started whiteboarding stuff and like that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it just like it was kind of nice for a while. I think it was that way almost all the way till the spring time, and it was only after I worked in Netlify that I was like, okay, maybe I should, buy a mic and move things prime time a little bit. But
just as like a viewer, I'll say the vibe was generally like, the best I could put it is it felt like going to your favorite professor's class and just listening to him rant, especially if like you weren't actually in the class and you had nothing that like you had to do homework wise. So you were literally just there for fun and to chill. It was like going to a seminar you weren't supposed to be in, is the vibe I always got from your streams, especially early on. And it was cool seeing how many people were excited about that, because we wanted to have our like way of thinking of things challenged and hear about a bunch of things we didn't understand. And someone mentioned this earlier in chat. Feels like sometimes when we're watching your content, we have to like pause and think for a bit, rewind a little, and then catch up on 1.5x speed to get back to the live. Even I do that watching your stuff. And I think it's so cool that that exists, because of this is a take that I've been developing more and more recently. There's a lot of different types of media around software development stuff, but I find one of the biggest strengths of video is how it allows people to learn about new things they might not have otherwise. Like, how likely is somebody to read a blog post about SolidJS being super fast versus a video with a crazy thumbnail like, oh my God, my React app is so much faster now, as a way for introducing these concepts. And I think that video has a unique strength in its accessibility in those ways.
Yeah, I've seen it, honestly. Like the streams, over time have gotten much more popular, and maybe not like live, but even the video content stuff, just retroactively, it's been crazy. That was the thing. Like even like when Astro, that's the thing. I was getting a lot of the framework creators talking about their next thing before it was even like released. Like I got first dibs somehow on that stuff, probably because I was like sitting there in their repos watching what they were doing. But like even like when the Astro SSR beta release came out and I had Fred on the stream, that the viewership on that was like, you know, okay, but like then like 4 months later Astro releases, you know, 1.0 and everyone kind of goes there, and like at that point the video actually became kind of like, that's actually one of my favorite videos of all time, me and Fred, and like we both didn't know what was going to happen because I didn't test like one specific mode of Astro, and we're like sitting there kind of going, okay, Lighthouse, what are you going to give us? And like real time we got a green score on a page that we thought it was impossible to get a green score.
I loved that
Like,
stream so much. I remember watching that one.
yeah, those are really cool moments that kind of happened organically, and yeah, I don't know, I'm just reminiscing now, but it was really cool because I kind of got further forward in time than I wanted to, but what happened was, yeah, this is how I bumped into Theo in the first place because of those streams, and I found out that Jacob was doing these spaces, and you guys like basically funneled the space into the stream, and then I was like, okay, what's a Twitter space? So I joined in a couple of those spaces and happened to just chance on like you know, one you were doing, and then like I think Dan Abramoff just jumped in there too, and
Good times.
that was like the first, and it wasn't recorded. It was like early days, and that was like the first time I really got into like Twitter Spaces at all. And like, I was pretty stoked from that moment because like honestly, I've probably said this before off screen, but I'm a huge fan of your content, and I knew right from there that you had a lot of potential to go places, and that's what we've seen. So, you know, I'm going to chalk that up to another one of my predictive powers.
Oh yeah, there are 3 people who were like in the space that were really early investors in Theo. They were Fred, you, and Tanner. Like those are the 3 people who are like, oh, this Theo kid's weird, but kind of knows what he's doing. I'll keep an eye on him. Like very specifically, you and Ryan both, or you and Fred both let me like help you with copy on your blog posts and such. Just I'm a nerd about writing and like messaging. And Tanner challenged me to look into TRPC and come back and share what I've learned. All of y'all were like established people in the space that made me feel very valid as a kid who had just quit my job at Twitch to go and do like software on my own and be more in this community. Like it's so surreal. Like just having all 3 of you in my apartment on Monday hacking away at random shit is so trippy, when a year ago you were like the top, like the most inaccessible, like I hope that we can like, I hope he considers me a friend someday type shit. And now we are where we are, where I hadn't realized how long it had been that I hadn't had you on the stream for, just because we talk all of the time.
Exactly. That was actually my biggest concern, and figuring out, because like, you know, like it's always best to talk about stuff when there's waves, when there's news, when there's like some kind of novel thing to pick up, but we could literally jump on the stream at any point. And then the thing is, sometimes you want something controversial. And the thing that always surprised me about Theo, because you know, I'm generally a little bit more mild-mannered, like 80% of the time, maybe 85% of the time, and Theo's a little bit, you know, is that how many times we are actually closer to agreeing than we would have thought. And then that doesn't really make for an interesting stream at all.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely we had this chat like yesterday, didn't we, where we were concerned about you coming on, like what are we going to disagree with? Yeah.
But
with
I think
poor freaking Alex Russell in the corner while we did it. Good times.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, meeting Alex was amazing too, because he's someone I've always wanted to talk to, because I have incredible respect for those who don't know. Alex Russell basically wrote all the like a whole set of articles about the cost of JavaScript on the web, and watching like, you know, the thing is, we build apps, we have fast computers, we have good internet, you know, all's great. But you know, he's been looking at it from the other side and looking at the numbers and understanding the real cost of the performance that comes with frameworks. And it's hard to be in his place because he's a consultant. So every time he like goes to like a new place and they're like, we're having issues, he's got to like go, okay, guys, you know, like, have you ever inherited someone else's code base? And like, picture that being your job. And like, sure, I mean, you're getting paid pretty well if that's your job, but then you keep on seeing the same things over and over again. And you're just like, can't we do something about that? Like, can't we teach people or do? And it's a frustrating place to be. And I'm very stoked for your debate coming up with him, because like there
Not
are
a debate,
multiple
it's a discussion, it's an interview.
discussion. Okay, that there's multiple sides to these things. Like there's multiple considerations, and it is actually a complex topic. But you know, sometimes when you're on Twitter, and again you have like X number of characters, things come off a little bit like harsher. So like I was actually very happy for this, because at a certain point, you know, a lot of fingers point at like framework authors. I am a framework author, so like you know, I never knew where I sat or where things sit, because a lot of times a lot of framework authors do spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and you know, despite best efforts, you know, things sometimes end up where they end up. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, it was a tangent, but I was like super stoked.
Like we had a vague plan of what we were going to do here, and we have entirely lost that in favor of just chatting as we always do, because we have so much to talk about. I try to think if it's even worth like trying to get back on the traditional rails. We should do a little bit of like what even is Solid, because there's over 700 people here, and I'm sure a decent number of them don't know what Solid is just yet. I want to give a quick overview of like what Solid is and how like a React developer would think of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So as mentioned before, Solid is a JavaScript framework for building user interfaces, which you're probably like, so what? But it's built off primitives, and you can somewhat think of primitives like hooks with not like the same hook rules. Basically, like I've been trying to find the easiest way to do this for people, especially from the React side. And I think the better I get at explaining this, you know, the better, you know, everything will get. But because the whole system is based off these primitives, we get away from a component model where everything re-renders over and over again. And it's very kind of more explicit, straightforward, what actually updates for you. And people found the DX for that really quite nice. And they found the performance that comes with that also quite nice. But for the most part, if you don't look closely, you might think you're just looking at React. And you know, there is a huge difference between Solid and React. It's funny. It's easier to show it.
I know you said that we weren't going to do much live code, but I would love to do the classic demo,
sure.
the in and out that you always do, that I absolutely love. Cool.
Open the. Do you know the playground? We can actually just do this online, and you can take this counter and just add two of them, and you can definitely do it.
I'm just gonna make. I guess I just need the one. Yeah. I'll make a function page.
Yeah.
Return div counter div, and we'll make this what gets mounted instead. And now we have hit save habitually. Now we have two counters, and you see each of these increment state. This all looks just like React, right, guys? You're all familiar with this? This all seem how you're used to? Y'all ready for the magic trick? The oh shit. Want to see how we make this global so that these are sharing state? Cut, paste. Now it's global. Because hooks, as we know, live within the component lifecycle and live inside of your components, but the signals that exist inside of Solid don't. You can define this however you want. You can structure your state, your application, the relationship between them however you want. This is the beauty of primitives. We don't have to think about our state in the context of the React virtual DOM and how it blasts everything out. Instead, we build our state, and then that renders our application. I know this is such a simple little thing. You literally move it here if you want it to be component level state. Refresh, and now it's component level. And you move it out, and it's not. Now it's global. But yeah. Hoping this helps emphasize how cool these patterns are.
And just like usually the thing that people need to see, can you put a console log in the body of the counter component?
Yes.
This just helps the final bit, because it emphasizes, people then immediately understand where the performance comes from and why this little thing. Yeah. I mean, you don't even need.
I'm just going to give them this so you can see like more easily.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And ID equals 2.
Right.
So here's the two counters. We're going to log which one it is. Re-rendering props.id. keep saving habitually. But what you'll see here is when I hit these, there's actually no re-rendering happening at all. It's not 1 or 2 re-rendering. Nothing re-renders.
Yeah. And the key thing to actually understand is that under the hood, and it's not even that big of a hood to lift, so to speak, Solid is literally just replacing the text on that button because it knows. That's why the small little thing here is the signal, it isn't just a value, it's called as a function. And because it's a function, we can intercept it. And then we know, oh, only the button text cares about this. So we basically crunch the whole tree down to like a simple event that goes update this DOM node in one little specific spot. And it doesn't matter how many components you do or use context. You can put something like at the top of the tree, like update it at 60 frames per second, and like it's only all the work's being done where it's getting consumed at the bottom.
Yep, it is that simple. It's weird. It definitely broke my brain for a bit personally, moving from React to building things more often in Solid, where I had to like unlearn a lot of React patterns. You can still do things a very Reacty way pretty often, but the fact that this doesn't rerun, this effectively gets run the first time it's called, and then anything that it returns that has a call to a signal, that will update at that level instead. So instead of thinking of this as a component that runs and then reruns when things change, you think of this as almost similar to React Server components, where it runs once, it generates the page, and then updates happen in signal land that exists there, which is also a big part of why Solid solved the hydration problem, as we mentioned before, and also why it's such a compelling solution to a lot of server-side, server-rendered problems. I'd love to dive into that a bit because of the big release today. How did we end up in serverland for Solid?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely took me a little while to get here because this was uncharted territory. And the reason for that is, like, first of all, I didn't get it at first. And this is, I'm not unlike a lot of people. I built apps behind logins. I was an app developer, and people made like real world demos and like more complicated apps. And it didn't matter. Some of them were like SSRing them. And the funniest thing was, and I blame Lighthouse for this a little bit, I was outperforming the SSR apps with Solid's client-side rendering. And the reason I was doing that was mostly that I'd come up with really good patterns in our router to parallelize data fetching and code splitting. So it was like very, very effective. And I built that right into our router. But at a certain point, around the time I started talking to guys at eBay and, that a little bit before, I suppose, someone's like, well, I realized, like, turn the network down, use a slow device. And then I realized that fetching on the client was actually incredibly, incredibly slow compared to basically all the network latency catches up with you. So I realized I needed to look in server rendering. And this was about like 2019-ish. So yeah, I mean, this is a little long-winded, I guess, like I always am. But essentially, I just started working on server rendering and trying to look at the best, fastest approaches to server rendering. And Marco was that. And the trick they did was just render to a string. I mean, it sounds very simple, but don't make a virtual DOM, don't make any kind of representation. And for me, this wasn't too hard because Solid doesn't, someone mentioned earlier, they're like, oh, Solid seems like Svelte, but it's actually very little like Svelte. Svelte is actually more like React. React and Svelte are actually very, very similar. And I know that's going to break some people's brains, but this is a true statement. And what I wanted to do was figure out how I could get my fine-grained reactivity onto the server. And Marco strings were something that I could compile to. Like the JSX already compiled different for Solid. That's the only part that compiles different. I could compile it to strings and basically actually remove the reactive system from the server for maximum speed. And essentially on the server, the JSX, instead of being like some kind of structure, it's literally just like a bunch of strings getting plussed together, plus, and building this up. And yeah, I mean, I could go really deep, and this could be a really long story, but the shorter story of it is working on the Marco team, saw the importance of things like streaming, and looking at stuff that React was working on for async. Basically, the Marco team had invented something called async fragments as a way of like swapping in like out of order content sometime back in 2014. There's actually an article on it somewhere. And what I realized was that they invented suspense back in basically 2014. And so I implemented that, and I used that to figure out how to get streaming support and how to get all these kind of like server pieces. But ultimately, Solid is still like a top-down library. Like we still have to render everything once. So I was pretty happy with that for a long time, and that's basically like the foundations of how I ended up getting into building a meta framework, because I built server-side rendering, and I realized that it was going to be like, I made demos and showed people, and they were like, I wanted server-side render too. And then like every single person who tried it like hit some weird issue. And I don't even mean with like Solid, like they couldn't figure out how to configure it. They couldn't figure out like you need multiple builds, and like, oh, you're in dev. Well, in dev, you also need different builds, and like your dev server, how does that interact with the client? Like if the change is like something that code that you only run on the server, and like, but it affects the data. Like it was just a big mess of stuff. And honestly, I was like really secretly hoping someone else would solve this for me. Like I'd come up with benchmarks and show Solid was really performant, but no one was using it for server rendering because it was so hard to figure out how to wire this up. And yeah, I mean, it was actually kind of interesting. The first attempt at a SSR framework for Solid was called Snap, and it was created by the guys at Builder.io, of all things. Steve.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, he was like, okay, yeah, let's make a Solid, because he was playing with Solid at the time.
Was that before Mishko had joined?
Yeah. And essentially, like, he'd taken Solid at Builder, and he saw a huge improvement over the hydration score. Like we didn't get him to 100, but we got him to like a pretty good place, right? And he was like, okay, well, we need an SSR framework to fully, test this. So he worked on that for a bit. And mitosis originally was built off Solid's language. Like we were like, can we use JSX to create every other framework? And I was like, yes, but like you need to be careful about the language. And it's because the language of reactivity has kind of become universal. And I know I'm like jumping all over the place, but to explain this is, I think everyone who's used React will get this. You have use state, you have use memo, and you have use effect. You have these three things, right? Every reactive library also has these three things. Now in React, they work differently, but you have the same intent. Like you have the same, like you like, this is state, this is derived state, and this is some side effect. And essentially, because of this union of languages, we realized with mitosis and maybe something like JSX, we could actually output every framework. Over time, they moved to more React, because like obviously everyone writes in React, but it's actually a subset of React, because it's actually a real pain to deal with like all the memoization stuff in React, like use ref when you're not a DOM node, use callback, react.memo. There's a whole bunch of like APIs specifically for this point, and they don't like, they cause interesting logic when you have like two things that need to talk to each other. You now have to store it in a ref. If anyone's ever read Dan Abramoff's article on like the use effect
state one, right?
He tries to do like a set interval with it.
Yeah.
And by the end, he like makes it, but he's using like multiple refs to communicate between two effects. And he's like, very, like, don't get me wrong, like it's a very clever solution. He's very proud of himself in the fact that he took something completely ugly imperative and turned it into something declarative. But for most people reading that, they're just like, I don't know if I would have come up with that on my own, right? And people always like that example in Solid, because literally the example you start with just works and you never have to do any of it. But like, the important part about that is you introduce all this language that makes it harder to get back to the pure intent. So it's always easier to take something like Solid and compile it to React than take something like React and compile it to Solid. Crazy tangent, but just explaining where mitosis actually came from. But anyways, yeah, I essentially, I had built the pieces. I'd built an isomorphic parallelized data fetching router, all that kind of stuff. People have been kind of talking about this stuff a lot in React recently, even like React location. But like we've had this for a few years now. And that's because like Ember back in like 2012 again had already figured this all out. Like I like love watching that chain of progression over the years, because like React router is also a big influence for our work. But you can see Ember's influence everywhere. Like, have you ever wondered why your link tags have two? Like, why wasn't it like href or something? And why is it called link and all that stuff? This is directly from Ember. So yeah, if you go, you'll find what I'm talking about.
Good stuff. Yeah, this history has been so crazy to watch, and there's so many parts I wanted to respond, but I didn't want to interrupt. The one I
Yeah.
keep thinking back on was the thing about Svelte, because I think it's really important for people to understand, because externally, if you're not a framework author, then Svelte looks like Vue and Solid looks like React. But internally, if you look at these things, Svelte works a lot more like React, and Solid works a little bit like Vue in one of its many implementations of how things can sometimes update, but not really. It's fascinating to think that like Solid, the same way I say that Next.js tricks React developers into being backend devs, Solid tricks React developers into writing performant code.
I love that. I need that. I need to use that. Yes, that's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great.
On that note, I do want to talk about the really cool backend stuff that was released today, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of cool things about this, but I want to talk or emphasize one point before we go in, which is something that we've touched on a lot: primitives. The moment I went from liking to loving React was when hooks happened, because when hooks were released, it was like, oh my God, I can abstract my state and build state primitives that do the state things I need in my application. The same way I can make a component and reuse that. Suddenly I could make a reusable piece of state, like a way to fetch user data and reuse that across my app. Hooks gave me ways to do that state management and manage the state outside of the component lifecycle while still living within the React virtual DOM. Even then, though, like those primitives were very, very tied to the core model of React's DOM. It just gave us an abstraction to let us think about them in more isolated ways and reuse those isolated pieces. That model has broken my brain and made me really believe in React. And I still firmly believe it's a lot of why we've seen the community form around it that we have, where people like Tanner can build 5 libraries that integrate really tightly with React, but also let us build very different things than how React's original model worked. I have not seen the same approach in backend very much. TRPC v10 has started going down this path with the new procedure model, where you have a procedure that you extend and then you throw in an object and consume, where there's this base piece that you consume from the backend. And one of the things that I was really excited about with SolidStart when I started looking into it more is it feels like you took that same primitive mindset of building reusable pieces that do not, or that don't do much, but do the thing that they do really well, which is scary at first when you look at the code, but is so much more powerful once you learn those parts and are comfortable with them. I'm curious how much primitive design was in mind when you started working on SolidStart.
Yeah, a ton, because I almost got to it. So this is good that we got here. I've made it very clear I don't like meta frameworks. I didn't want to create a meta framework. I never used Create React app. I built my own config. I did all this. I felt weird pushing this on people. So the only logical thing that I could do, if I wanted to get the meta framework space, was make it modular so that anyone could just not use anything I did. Because I hate telling people like what to do in that kind of sense. I don't mind having opinions about specific tools or specific pieces, but for me, I want my stuff to be adaptable, like modular, swappable. I don't want it to be flexible. Flexible usually just makes your stuff like eventually suck. Like it just gets slow and bloated, too many options, all that. I just wanted like these building blocks essentially. And that meant that there was a careful balance here, because you don't want to like overwhelm people and go like, here's the whole bucket of Lego. But like on the other hand, like I still didn't want to do very much. So luckily there's 2 pieces to make this possible. And the biggest piece for that was Vite and Vite 2.0 release, because they introduced a universal plugin system. And for most people, this seems like something really small. You're kind of like, oh, like, so what? Like we've had rollup plugins and Webpack plugins forever, but it's like such a simple thing. When you're building this environment for SSR, you have a dev environment. So you have like dev servers, you have the client build, and you have the server build, and they're all different. You have like 4 different combinations. And I actually was in Snowpack at one point and like building all 4 of these. Like as much as you want them to be the same, there are different considerations in each, but there's a lot of overlap. And then you end up like in this mess of crap. And the problem is then like you're working from 4 separate routes. What Vite did with their plugin model with SSR was they made it an option. So like every single plugin can serve all 4 scenarios. So now you just slice things in the opposite direction. Like instead of slicing things like like it's like horizontal versus vertical. Like you've changed the way that you can compose behavior. And this is the key. We saw this right away. At that point, I was like, sweet. I don't have to run a meta framework. I just have to write some Vite plugins. Because like suddenly it was like, oh, what's a concern? File system running. Okay. Like it's one vertical. What's another one? This. And we could just keep on adding as many as you want and like even not force people to even use them. Like who cares? And that was really important to me. And as I mentioned before, I'd already built a lot of pieces in the ecosystem, kind of like a Tanner, like in the sense like, oh, I got a routing solution, I got this solution, and just hoping that people kind of stitch it together and not have to like do this, like build a meta framework. So I like took those two pieces and mentalities because I wanted to use our existing router. I didn't want to make a new SolidStart router or whatever. And this ability to have these like plugins that just worked. And I said, this completely changes things, even though it seems like such a subtle thing. Like Evan's work on Vite and the API surface is so smart. The second I saw it, I was like, this has everything I've been looking for. It's like we didn't talk to each other. And then it's like you find that dream product that you've been thinking about in your head and like, but didn't want to write yourself. Like even the glob imports, like there's little glitches and issues with Vite that they keep on getting better with every release. But like generally,
to tell ES build that it's a React app in order for it to recognize JSX.
Yeah. React is funny. React is so de facto in tools. I mean, you almost got me on like another tangent kind of thing here, but like you don't understand how frustrating that is, especially on JSX tooling and stuff. And like basically they go, oh, I see JSX, it must be React. And some tools have configure around it, but even TypeScript, JSX and TypeScript for React pollutes the global namespace. Like everyone else is nice. They're like, okay, I'm going to import my JSX. But no, it's like, if you don't do that, React is just by default everywhere. So it just keeps on sneaking in like this whack-a-mole. You're like, oh, I thought I removed all the React. No, it's still there. And it's like same thing with all the build tools and stuff. And everyone's like, oh yes, I like my opinionated build tools. But like you can't, if you're prettier basically compiles React, like then you have a thing. And like TypeScript is a little bit like that. All opinions, everything is essentially React. And it makes like, it just like, there's so many little things you hit. And like, that's another reason to iron this out in a meta framework so you don't have to worry about it, because there is a lot of this kind of messiness behind the scenes just because these kind of assumptions. It's very hard to make agnostic tooling because it's, you cater to the majority, but sometimes that catering to the majority like is like completely alienating. Like it creates a cycle. And the funniest thing is, I'm just going to keep on going. No build tools and like the recent kind of move towards like no build, but actual build. Like if it was actually no build, I'd be like, whatever. But let's face it, like your Preact JSX is getting compiled. The browser does not understand JSX. So if you made something that's no build, then you've actually probably just chosen a favorite. Like it's not that it's no build. It's just like we only support React. And that's kind of the interesting reality face. It's like, because we are so far away from that. Every framework has compilers and tree shaking and code splitting and like so much detail going to deliver these optimal packages. We've stepped way past in our tooling. It's not just about like Babel, like, oh, now most browsers support modern syntax, you don't need it. No, our tool chains have incredible amount of AST transformations that are not the standard ones. So anytime we try and like simplify and just go like, okay, it seems to be fine, it's usually just pinpointing on like, okay, it's React, it's fine. So I like ES build versus SWC. Like that's the thing. It's funny that we use ES build now because of Vite, but I had like almost no interest about ES build, whereas very, very hot on SWC because just SWC enables stuff. Like I don't care how fast you can go to do this one thing if you can't support like anything. So okay, that's my rant.
We chatted a bit about this yesterday. I want to make sure I wouldn't like go too deep on any of the like many rabbit holes that exist here. Just wanted to drop a quick joke, but it is fascinating to see how things like Vite and things like Astro are both lowering the barrier for entry to do something like SSR in your application, in your framework, but at the same time force you to way more deeply understand their architectures and solutions to the point where you're thinking in terms of horizontal versus vertical like plugin integrations in a bundler. I saw somebody in chat was like they're struggling to even comprehend how someone can get there with their understanding of a bundler like Vite, but that is like you've traded the need for a deep understanding of the entire ecosystem for a need for a deeper understanding of this specific solution's philosophy around it.
Yeah, that's fair. But the beauty of this is, in the end, you want a meta framework or something. So it's gonna look like to you like a bunch of plugins that you can in your CLI just add. You know what I mean? So I think it's okay. But yes, for me, personally, working on this stuff, I have now learned a whole bunch of stuff that I did not know before.
I can't
So
even imagine. I need to do two shout outs really quick. The first one is to Fernando, FDA CIUK. He just rated us with 50 viewers. Appreciate you a ton, man. You've always been a real one. Always good seeing you stop by. Thank you a ton. I shouted him out earlier in chat. I'm going to do that once more quick. Make sure you guys are all following him. Great additional, one of the like earlier programmers on Twitch too. He's been around way longer than me. So definitely give him a follow. Good having you here, man, as always. One other quick shout out. So I'm looking at YouTube. I'm seeing a lot of viewers, like 270 of you. Love you all. But there's only 121 likes, which is really suspicious because if you didn't know this, likes are free and they help the channel a ton. So if you don't mind hitting that like button, we would really appreciate it. Helps the channel, helps when people see this, make sure people know what's going on and that they can come here for this. So yeah, sorry for the interruption. Had to get those out. Shall we go to the article to show off how Solid thinks about SSR in the modern times?
yeah, because this is where it all is. Yeah.
Super hyped on this. So, introducing SolidStart, the official beta release. Been working on Solid for a while. Yada yada. Anything in here in particular, or should I just scroll?
Well, the only thing I got to say about the intro, because someone told me it was too personal.
No,
and they're right.
that.
It was just, you know what the problem is? I create the framework at first and I didn't care and I was just doing it. And then after a couple of years, I was like, oh, yeah, I want to show you this cool stuff I've been doing. And then at a certain point, I was like, okay, well, if people are like, oh, should I use it? Can I use it? And I'm like, well, if it's reasonable for you to use it. But at a certain point, I got this trend of people who are coming to me and being like, man, Solid looks pretty sweet. Once you have blank, we're going to give it a shot, And then, but I kept on running to those people again. And don't get me wrong, I think they're being pragmatic and good, but it was just hilarious to me because every time we did what they said, they were just like, "Oh yeah, no, that's really good. When you guys have this, we'll do that." Like this chain never ended. It was like, "Oh, SSR, 1.0 production release, component library," and then like it got to like a meta framework. After a while, it's just like I've just got this checklist that I just need to go down, and it has basically stopped at Next.js. That was the thing. Apparently today, Next.js is table stakes for any kind of JavaScript library. You have to be like an actual framework for anyone to actually use you. So that's why SolidStart is here, and that's what the intro is, because it's fun. It was amusing to me because like how long do you chase this stuff for? At a certain point, you're gonna try it. Okay.
I think that there is a lot of value with like you in particular and how you are so well known for knowing the framework stuff in particular. In a lot of ways, Solid isn't just like a framework people use and ship in production. It's a model for us to learn from, understand, and grow from. An analogy I was going to make earlier is like the Death Grips to Kanye West pipeline, where there's this crazy indie but decently popular group, Death Grips, that makes music the vast majority of people would never be able to listen to because its goal isn't to be listenable, it's to prove something out. I feel like Marco's kind of in that world where you're the bridge showing how these things do apply in a more general way and how we can learn lessons from those more chaotic experiments and apply those day to day. But we have to get over some of our other shit first. And that's what I see when I read here. It's, look, I've looked at both sides. I've seen the extreme and Death Grips land over in Marco, and I've seen what Katy Perry's doing over in React. But how do we go from one side to the other? This to me is you saying how we're doing that.
Yep. Yeah. No, the lot of thought went into these things. So yeah, let's keep going.
Keep scrolling. So what does it do?
Yeah, it's a modern JavaScript framework, which means that it does lots of stuff. I actually got to give a big shout out to Remix right at the beginning here because they were the first. Like we all do this like request response thing. SvelteKit, that's where I got it from. Remix, Quick City, Marco, like everybody does this. But Remix were the first ones to actually build like a session management and cookie storage and stuff like that. And the reason we all use the request response model is because that's what all the edge functions use. They use stuff like Dino and stuff like Cloudflare. And so we're all building towards a spec, and it's actually Node the odd one out. And they support streaming and web streams and all this stuff. So we built our platform on that. Remix got us session management. Vite got us hot module reloading. And for the most part, that it does client. You can turn on SSR or not SSR. It has most of the basic features. but then I can go to talk about a few of the specific ones.
Grr.
Yeah, you knew this was going to come first.
Yeah.
I feel like this is table stakes now as well. As much the tricky part is like, I mean, you can wire this yourself and you do all the lazy dynamic imports and do all that stuff. And everyone has their fun syntax. You're like trying to scroll past it out of the screen before anyone looks at it too long. But no, I mean, honestly, we just took this from Nuxt to Next. It's the classic, square bracket pattern. The only difference is you can use parentheses style to do nameless routes, so you can like do auth like be under this. It's those kind of patterns. And the thing is, we realized, and again, people don't have to use this. All those things with parentheses could just be index.tsx if you wanted. It was just, we realized that we already had nameless things, so why not also just make those things nameless as well? So I like this personally. Some people like naming their things layout and page and like having 1,000 pages and 1,000 layouts. I'm like the complete opposite. I want all my files to be searchable. I want to know, I want everything to have a unique name. You can do that with this router. And if you really, really hate nested routing, you can just not use it. If you scroll down a little bit past where we are right now, you'll see that Hydrogen had this really cool idea. See, the routes component in this little example here is just solid routers routes component. If you've used any solid before, you can just use it. So we just export the file system routing as just a route definition that you can insert, but you can also like put other routes in there or just never insert that file routes thing.
This is the most elegant way to nope out a file-based routing I've ever seen. This is beautiful.
Yeah, you just don't include it. Don't use the routes folder like we do routes folder. Just put your stuff wherever the hell you want it, and then import it, and then just use your JSX definition or use your config object.
How to write a unit test that would check to make sure you didn't do this. I would just import the file route component, mount it in the test, and see if anything's there. If anything's there, fail you.
Yeah. So there you go. I know not everyone likes this. I think this is a really good way to get started.
I love this. This is such a great example of the primitives thing that I was talking about, where like instead of making this crazy config file somewhere in the code base where I have to go to Google, find the doc, find all of the different keys that do the different things I need, and then realize the key I need is actually a weird thing I have to export from a file. And then, and only then, I am finally now allowed to change or turn on or off a feature that I want. Where here, file routes is a primitive. It's an actual component that I can import and use or not use. That feels much more it's convention over config, but what I see here is the best of both, where it's a convention that is a primitive that allows me to config in a logical, composable way. Yeah,
and honestly, Hydrogen, 100% Hydrogen. Brett came on my stream and showed me this, and I was just like, thank you. This is one of those things that just like bugged me a little bit. And I know, see, the problem sometimes when you make the primitive choice, you usually lose one layer of nicety on your abstraction. Instead of just having one component you import in your root, file, you now have to import two things. You have to import routes and file routes. So everyone, I mean, we auto-gen this file, so it's not a big deal, but everyone takes that cost of typing those, having those extra characters there to enable this. But to me, this is such a small thing to enable, so much. Like, it's completely worth it from my perspective.
I love that. I saw somebody in chat say this actually means you can write your entire full stack app in one file in your root.tsx, which I love.
Yes.
Funny enough, even Ryan Florence on the Remix side was recently publicly complaining that he feels like it's a failure in their part that you can't write a whole Remix app in one file if you really want to.
Right. And this is something we can actually completely do because our route, like our data, because I told you we use our router. So our like loader equivalent is essentially it's just a function. So while we have a convention in our files with like export const route data, you can also use a convention naming it the same and going .data, which we don't talk about and we kind of stop doing. But my point is, if you were doing the config yourself, literally you could do whatever the hell you want and just import the loader function from anywhere and just put it in your route definition. So like we don't have any strong ties to the file system routing.
I love that. This is the least I've hated file system routing in a while, so I appreciate that a ton. But let's talk about server functions, because this is the thing I've been eyeing from the corner for a bit now, and I am so hyped on how we're doing this.
Yeah, I mean this one is also the one with the most interesting set of trade-offs and considerations. And if you since we first talked, you might notice there's like a dollar sign on the server
Yep.
thing. And I actually should have given quick a shout out for inspiring the API design on that. That's a miss. I should do that. But essentially, SolidStart has API endpoints like you're used to, where you can like make a file and have like get post set. And we actually use Capcase that we got from StelkKit. We think it makes it very clear that these are special exports. I think Rich was like right on with that. But before, like that's fine if you want to make an external API, but it, like for SolidStart, like the baseline, you're making like these monoliths. Like that's what all these meta frameworks are. They're like these little new monoliths. So my approach of choice was RPC. And I mean, I've seen TRPC get really popular and stuff, but like this goes back to I don't even know how long, because I remember I was first suggesting it and someone's like Blitz, and I'm like, I don't know what Blitz is because I was not in the like, but I saw Blitz, I was like, yes, like Blitz. So like I knew when I like if I was gonna do the meta framework, I wanted to do RPC calls. And I was doing it with these proxies and stuff, which you can do a lot with proxies. But Nikhil, also on SolidStart team, was like, yeah, well, we can just make this a Vite plugin. Like so it's like a compiler, like we can just like opt in and be like, let's add this one plugin that transforms this. And that's why it has a dollar sign, because technically speaking, the content inside, I mean, it's kind of obvious, runs on the server. So the only variables that it can access are those that are in like file modular scope. So we have to indicate that, because you can literally nest this anywhere in your components. Like you can literally like inline it if you want in like the middle of like an effect or something. So you know, you have to know that closures and stuff don't work. And that's why I made the dollar sign. So you can do that. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. But it is actually interesting in terms of how you inline stuff, because there are options for that. But essentially what this is any function you pass into the server function gives you a new function. And when you call that function, if you're on the server, it just calls it as normal. And if you're on the client, it behind the scenes does like a Ajax call. And the code that you write inside your server function is always on the server. And because it's defined like a function with a function wrapper like this, it is very easy to just use TypeScript to type everything, the return type, the arguments, like whatever the hell you want. And, you know, it's very simple mechanism, because it's like, you know, like this example, it's like I'm saying hello. I don't know why you want to do this, but it obscures the whole like API route URL thing. Like if you really want, there's a greeting.url on this function. If you want to like plug it into server-side events or do like fancy stuff with it, there is a real URL behind it. But we let you put as many of these as you want in a file, and essentially we just give them their own URL endpoint, and you can just like, here you go, here's a function, call it. And it's an async function, so you have to await it or then it. But essentially, it just type safe, or as type safe, I guess, as you can get across the wire. But you know, function that runs. I don't know.
Yeah, this one has chat going. They are hyped on this, as I expected, as us TRPC nerds are bound to be. The one question I want to jump on before we go too deep in is the serializability of response data. Like if I was to return a date time here, what happens?
Yeah. Let me see. I need to double check what we're using for serialization right now. I know we are not using Solid Standard Serializer. This is something that we probably should look into.
Maple's quote: "This is the nirvana as fuck of server actions."
Yeah, and I one of you guys are going to probably go in there and be like, "You're not serializing this right," and we're like, "Okay, yeah, let's do something. Let's get Super JSON or whatever the hell is this." We're in beta right now. This has worked fine for all the simple crap that we're doing. We will make sure that this uses something that, like, because the beautiful thing about that serialization is like all the work happens on the server. It's not going to push that expense onto the client too much, depending on which library you're using. So we're going to. I need to double check this. I said Nikhil built this as a compiler. My suspicion is that this is using something very, very simple, and we should use something a lot better, because Solid's own internal serializer can handle a whole crap load of stuff, but I'm pretty sure this is not using it. So good point.
Yeah, you have Maple very, very excited right now, and I'm hyped too. I thought I showed you this earlier. When I first saw this in a demo, I was like, oh god, yep, this is it. I obviously keep a close eye on all of the similar things. For both context for the audience, and also because I'm curious of your thoughts. Have you seen Next Fetch yet?
No, I haven't.
This is a package by Schwiz, whatever he goes by, Schlez, I think, as well. He's a somewhat recent hire at Vercel. He built FNM, which is the node version manager rebuilt in Rust. and is a hardcore TypeScript nerd, and started hacking on NextFetch as a kind of an alternative to TRPC, built very specifically for Next because it's heavily surrounded by SWC and the like SWC compile hack. So you export const, use message, you have query. It takes two things. First thing is a Zod validator for your input. Second thing is your async function for the output. And then this at compilation time is turned into an endpoint. And then when you call it, it does the fetch. What this doesn't do is the direct call on server when server rendering, as far as I know at least. It theoretically could. I don't think it does. But you're now allowed to effectively write a function, export it. The catch being this has to be in a special file named .swr.ts before it will work. But as long as you name the file that way, the compiler is smart enough to export this like a normal hook, even though under the hood it uses either SWR or React Query.
That's interesting. Yeah, this is very similar. I don't know when he authored this. I don't think he saw the SolidStart stream that I did 3 months ago.
I have been keeping a close eye on all of these projects, and I was trying to send him docs on the way Solid was doing this, and they didn't exist yet, so I couldn't.
Yeah. No, this is actually very cool. I'm not surprised. We're all working towards this very similar place. As I said, my first version of Actions used proxies, and that was like 2021 sometime. And Nikhil was like, hey, we can do something here. So yeah, I'm not surprised at this direction. I think this is very it's kind of like the obvious like next steps to kind of go. You're like, okay, if I can do this, how can I get the, like you control both sides, like why not? I think where it gets challenging is the next level, but it looks like he was actually attacking it as well, which we'll do too, because I saw a mention of a form component, and that is definitely in our thinking. Oh, it's my favorite time.
Yep, I'm sure you knew this was coming. I'm seeing a new spectrum, and I want to describe it. This is the where your server code goes spectrum. And on one side here is a backend service. So something like Nest.js or some chaos, like rewriting something in Golang or Laravel or some shit. Like a service that is exclusively backend and nothing else. And on the other end, think you guys have won. This is SolidStart server functions. And it's interesting to think that on this side, you literally just put the function wherever and you can call it. On the other side, it's, you need to understand the infrastructure before you're allowed to do that. I think that next fetch, somewhere around here. I think that TRPC is probably here-ish. I think Remix goes a slight... Remix is interesting because in Remix, you don't put it in a separate folder, but you're more limited about where you put it. So I'll say that Remix and TRPC are kind of close. It's either here or here, depending on how you want to define the spectrum. We have React Server components, which I'd say are honestly pretty close to Remix, maybe a little closer to NextFetch, React Server, or RSCs. I'll put that a little closer to NextFetch. I'd say this is actually a little further because it's in the component. I'd say it's a little further than NextFetch. Then you have like get server-side props, which is what it is.
The interesting thing, and I mean, this is the thing I've been trying to think about is, what I love about modularity and primitives like this, and the same thing I was explaining earlier when I was talking about the loader data functions, is yes, you can co-locate. I love the ability to co-locate because I love the ability to put the whole thing in the one file like we talked about. But when you have that ability, nothing stops you from from pulling it out into separate files. Like you can make a file full of server functions or whatever, you can define it like a special API, you can have all your database stuff in a separate place and then like import it in and then, wrap it.
I just saw a point from Nikhil that is resulting in me wanting to ask a really crazy question. So Nikhil pointed out that you can use this in a single page app as well with SSR turned off. You would still need the server though to run that stuff, which has led me to a much more chaotic concept. Would I be able to use SolidStart's server, export a bunch of these server functions, and then import those in another app, probably a Solid web app, maybe something else, and be able to import my backend as a package for multiple different things that still does all of these same compiler hacks?
That's interesting. Nikhil might actually have to be the one to answer that question, unfortunately. I'm trying to think in like how this would work in a separate place, because the Vite plugin is what
I just
gives
broke
us
chat by asking that.
The V plugin is what gives us the identity. It uses like the file hash and like stuff in order to figure out what the URL is. So then we can put those anywhere. So I don't know if we can link up both sides. Yeah, Nikhil's gonna have to answer this one for you, I think. Hopefully
Why
it's
are
still in
people
chat.
offended? That would be so cool if I could make a backend package that I can import in multiple things and the functions
Yeah,
just work. Like, that's so cool. That's so
but
cool.
I guess the thing
He
is
said yes.
like
So the
yeah.
answer is yes. Theoretically, we could actually do this.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't thinking right because you make the module like that, and then you'd import into your app, and it's at app time that we do the transformation. So yes, that makes sense. Yeah. So
You just have
yeah,
to pass it the URL for like what the web server that it should be going to is, and from there you can do that. I actually do this a bit with TRPC already, where I have like a separate TRPC like package in my mono repo that exports our API, and I can then import that in our next React app, both the server side to deploy it, but the client side to fetch as well. And then on like a React Native mobile app, I can also import that same client from that same package, and the overall experience is just magical. That level of like code sharing, but your like code sharing is also infra sharing, and that was like the mind-blowing moment for me. It's like I'm not just like sharing a GraphQL schema and generating something different for each client. I'm actually sharing the code itself in the server. Even if I'm not using that code on the client, I am calling that code from the client, like a truly universal RPC layer. And the power of this RPC layer is cool enough that I now want to abuse it for those purposes.
yeah. I mean, I look forward to it. I don't know if we're gonna hit some interesting edge cases,
Oh,
but
we always do.
generally speaking, this was the thinking. Nikhil's done lots of stuff with this. Like, as I said, the URL on the server function had allowed him to like, he's got WebSockets with durable objects on the edge on Cloudflare doing like, yeah, like he made a chat app, type thing with the durable objects on the edge using this server mechanism. Yeah, like, yeah, it's wild. Anyway,
I
uh,
absolutely love this. This is such cool stuff. I am hyped. And this is the thing I was hinting at earlier with the primitive stuff. This is what a truly primitive backend piece looks like. This is a thing that you create, and then you can export, import, do whatever you want with. So if I was to
right.
re-architect this to be about how primitive are these patterns, like how much can you import something somewhere else, this would actually flip a little bit. I'd say RCs and next fetch I'd say RCs are a little further. Next
Yeah.
fetch is not quite as far, but still pretty solid. Remix goes way further down, closer to where get server side props is, because you have to put the loader where you want to. TRPC stays a little closer here, not quite. But this is like, how much does the framework tell you where the code goes? In SolidStart server functions, you it seems like you almost don't have an opinion, which is really cool.
I don't like opinion. I like having specific opinions about a specific thing, not
Primitives
the
over
over.
prescriptions.
Yeah. Yeah. All variations of that saying.
Love it.
But the thing is, like, this is powerful. This is almost too powerful. Like, this is just like, so we were like, okay, this is where we started, and I think a lot of us, like even Nikhil, was like, yeah, okay, we're done. Like, we've done it. Like, I did ask everyone for one more layer, and it's because Remix was starting to get popular, and I really appreciate how simple Remix has made things for people. And I was like, can we get like 80% of that simplicity and not give up what we care about? And that's what we're going to go to next in this.
I've had something I've wanted to show on stream for a while and haven't had a good enough reason, but we finally do. We're going to go to NPM trends real quick. Is it .com? Yes. Cool. So I want to show something that blew my mind recently. At remix / React is the primary Remix runtime. We're going to compare this with at trpc / server. See something very interesting. And I also feel like I have to resize this window in order to show this off without doing other things. So I'm going to do that. Resize so y'all can see with us here that somewhat recently, TRPC surpassed Remix for adoption. So while, yes, the Remix patterns are catching on huge, and they are, I think that the TRPC primitive patterns have struck a stronger nerve with the community overall. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the primitive type-safe design that things like TRPC enable, combined with the like more granular adoption patterns and opportunities that something like TRPC offers, are super valuable. And I do really like that Solid is leaning into the more modular, more primitive approach, even if the co-located data loading patterns at a route level are a powerful and arguably more performant by default pattern.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where we want to go. And I said 80% remix. The other 20% is something that if we put on this graph, the whole thing would shrink at like flat line, and that's React query or TanStack query. That's the other.
I'll do TanStack or React query for now so you can see. And yep. Now I want to see something. I'm actually really curious. React query versus Next. Next is beating React query, but not by as much as I would have expected. That's fascinating to see, actually.
Yeah.
God, I love looking at NPM trends. You can learn so much from here. Anyways.
At the end of the line, there's this big spike. It's almost like they had a conference or something just the other day.
Yeah, crazy how that happens. I know. Excited for it to level back out right after.
Yeah. Okay. So I think everyone more or less gets this. Do you have any more questions on this? So do you know what I didn't say? Like, this can be kind of anything. Like we're returning simple objects, and when there's simple objects, we just handle it with like our standard serialization. But we were like, how do we unify this model a bit? And Nikhil's like, we can just return request and our response objects, like actual web response objects too. So like this RPC mechanism actually can also function as like a normal endpoint where you can set status codes and like do that whole game. So yeah,
actually, on that note, how would I access that in here? Like with the signature, what would like the key I use, or what like would I put in here in order to get access to the request object?
Yeah, I believe it's like we actually just hang it off the server function. If you go like server $.request, you actually just like have the request right there.
Interesting. That is really interesting.
We had some options. We were talking about this and stuff, but yeah, like that was one of the trickier parts about this API, so to speak, is figuring out how we can get it in there, because it is context based, like where it's running and when it's running. So yeah, we kind of made it almost like a lookup, like essentially hung it off the server $sign object. So
interesting. Yeah, I always get a little scared when I see $signs in my code nowadays, but I do get the distinction here. I'm assuming there's also like a lint rule of some form where if you try and call this inside of something with a closure, it will like error and tell you such.
It should. I don't know if we were there completely. As I said, beta, I get to make a lot of excuses at this point. So yeah. We should be smarter with the compiler to tell people when stuff goes wrong. I actually think Nikhil has actually had some stuff around those type of errors.
Yeah, I see Maple would have preferred that the function has like two like inputs. One is input, which is the thing you type, and one is request, which is the request, so that you have it here instead of resolving it from here. I'm actually 50-50 on it. I really like that this is just a function that you write a generic asynchronous function, and if you really need the server stuff, that it becomes clear you do, because you consciously pollute this like function internally with the server $call. It feels to be like it's clear like where this is, as soon as this is called, that this has to run on a server in Solid Server, whereas if you had custom input types here, that would be less clear. I'm 50-50 on it. I hear what you're saying, Maple, but I do think that both are fine.
Yeah, we had this debate obviously multiple times. So yeah, this is where we were. It was me. I was the one who was like, I just want it to be a function. And like I do this a lot because Nikhil's more on the flexibility side. He's like, oh, this and this. And I'm just like, at the end of the day, like I often like, if something feels too complicated from a primitive standpoint, it's like either doing too much or it's not right. So like, I was just like sitting there going like, no. I was like insistent sometimes. And he sometimes he'd be like, you know, trying to push me a little bit on it. And I just be like, no, this one just needs to be a function. Once it stops being just a function, it just doesn't feel right. And I know that's such a weird, like, what are we talking, feeling kind of thing, but that's how I approach this stuff at times. It's funny.
Yeah, I really dig this. I'm excited to see how we do actions, though, as actions do behave a little differently. So
right. Well, and the first thing before I even get into the route data and actions is, Solid has create resource, which is like our like pseudo, it's like half of React query. It doesn't have any of the caching or any of that stuff. It just has a very simple way of updating and turning out async, promise into a signal. But what I want to point out in this like little example is the fetcher function that you pass in as like the second argument. You can just like wrap it in server now, and now it's like your call to your database, right? That's what I'm talking about, the power of this primitive. This is why you have the arguments, because you literally get to keep the function as it is, and you can just like inline it to where existing functions already exist in your code base, like kind of patterns, right?
Very interesting. Is the role of this function call here, like I haven't done too much create resource. This is to like create the key, and this is like the key is post/this. We are now keying as the response we get here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Create resource inside the get post ID. I'll get the ID as the argument. And the reason that it's in a function call here is that our keys have to be reactive. So that piece is always going to be in the browser. This is why we can't use async loaders, because we want fine-grained reactivity. We want this to only change when that param ID changes. So this is where there's like the bit of the API thing. I like a lot of systems are just like async loader, easy done. For us, we're like, well, what if you want multiple resources? What if you care only on certain specific things to change, you want to update? So that reactivity is always in the browser. So it was funny. Create resource always had that separation, because I always made it that only the source was reactive and the fetcher wasn't. And the reason we did this was for serialization. So like when you server rendered something, we could create the promise, and then when you hydrated on the client, we went fetch again, and we generate a promise in the browser, and then it would resolve as the server finished it. So we like kind of like threw the promise across the wire. I needed to separate the reactivity so that it wasn't always generating bad promises, and by pure chance of maybe good design, that also lines up here, which gives us a clear boundary between the client part and the server part here that we have to wrap.
Makes interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of like the boundaries there in particular. And
well, this is I show this to be illustrative, and I show this because if you replace create resource with solid query or with whatever turbo query or whatever, you actually get the server only functionality with your favorite data fetching library that you already use.
That interesting. I like that you're not providing this. A lot of frameworks felt it necessary to like create a new use loader data or use itself. And this is, you didn't make another new thing. You just did it.
We did though create a new thing. We're just not far enough now. I'm sorry.
Let's take a look at the new thing. Oh, create server data. Here we are, a new thing. Yay! What's this new thing? Yeah. What does it do?
Right. Sorry. Like, so I did this because I wanted that possibility. But the problem is, create resource doesn't have caching, doesn't have all the stuff you have in solid query. And out of the box, I'm not like, I wasn't going to be like use solid query necessarily, or use this thing. I was trying to find something the most minimal that we could ship. So you can understand why, like with the primitives, you still sometimes need to do this. This is where I told you, Nikhil, was like, we're done with the server. And I was like, no, this isn't nice enough. So this primitive is your baseline. You don't have to use it. You can just forget about it and go back to your server, just use your solid query or whatever. But what we did was this is a resource under the hood, but it's a little bit special. We need to register these resources because these ones are special. The key now, the source, is now an actual key. And you'll notice this pattern. It's very familiar. I took this like straight from TanStack query. This is his array pattern for invalidation and partial invalidation. And like essentially you have a key, and then instead of returning like a tuple with a bunch of extra options, this is like super simple. It literally just returns the accessor resource. So you can just straight pass out the signal. You can put like multiple of these in your route data function. Like the route data function is where the route stuff comes in. This is like the loader, so to speak, in these examples, but it runs on the server and client, which is why we were kind of explicit. The create server data $sign means that the first argument is going to be wrapped in a server function. That's the convention here. So we made this. There's also a create route data without the $sign, which is like the non-server compiled version. But you're like, why am I doing all this? Well, the reason is we needed a way to tie resources to the route so that when action invalidation happened, that we knew what to refetch. And the default is if the actions like don't do anything, don't provide a key, we refetch all the route data. Should sound very similar to Remix.
So the role of the keys is less for a cache and more for a refetch trigger. So this is like an identifier that an action can then use to say, hey, by the way, Solid, everything that has this key is wrong now. Go update it.
Yes, exactly. So what we allow for us is for our actions to do granular refetching instead of just redoing the whole route page. And you can have multiple of these things as you want. And yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that pattern. It's
interesting. This is the most different I've seen so far. One quick question is the route data naming special? Is by exporting something named route data on a like route file, is that what triggers this behavior, or is this a thing I could import, name whatever, and use however?
No, it is special because we need a way to find it. Like for the file system routing to work, we needed to find the location. I told you could literally, if you made the config yourself, you could actually just import it directly and put it on. But the file system routing needs to find it. So that is special because we need to name it. If that makes sense.
Interesting. It almost like the best I could describe it is the way this feels externally is that you built the primitives that we see here. Yeah. And recognized that to use these primitives to have something like remix data loading patterns for parallel loading, like in a nested route, you would have to build a bunch of things. And rather than leave us, the community, to go build, identify, and do that, even though you call out how we could do that if we wanted to ourselves, you gave it to us in these shapes.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. I felt it was important to go get to the end because a lot of people coming in don't care about all the cool stuff that I care about in terms of primitives. So I was like, as much, I didn't want to block you. This is very important. But I'm going to provide a few tools so that like the person who starts up and this is their first project and they don't know anything, they don't know what they like, they have very sane defaults in terms of like how to approach this. You get something, it's like like a little bit more than Remix. Like by default, yeah, we refresh the route data. And what's special about our server data or route data that we have here is that it is a resource, but it's actually a store underneath the hood resource. So it's really cool. For resources in Solid Core, I don't opt into this because I don't want to make that decision for you. Again, a promise to a signal is the simplest thing, but we have ability in Solid to say what the underlying storage of resource is. And for these, again, opinionated, I made it a store. So whenever new data comes from the API call, it does a data diff inside the primitive, and then it's only the fine-grained pieces of data that change that actually updates. So like, even though we refetch all the data on the page, you could picture like you have a list of users or something, and with some addresses and one street name, you refetch all the data, which seems kind of wasteful, but whatever. But only one street name changes. Solid only notifies that one street name and updates only that one place in the DOM.
Fascinating.
So
that's actually really cool. So like if I was like 15 routes deep on like dashboard /users/user ID/friends/that friend's ID, and I'm really deep in, and I update a user's name, and all of the places that are calling user are returning user/that user ID, and my action invalidates that one user ID, it will only update the subcomponents in the giant lists and all of those things that have that key that they're dependent on.
Yes.
Without having to reload the page at all. It just does that on the client.
Yes.
This is the promise that nobody has figured out so far. As far as I know, Remix does not have anything resembling that level of granular updatability once the page has rendered. I actually have a diagram from one or two streams ago. Let me dashboard stream.
I have no choice. Solid has a mixed knife, so to speak, because we have to be this optimal. The framework forces you to, because if you re-rendered a bunch of crap, you'd create a bunch of DOM nodes, and that would be terrible. So we have no choice to be the most optimal at all times. I don't know. It's kind of a funny side effect.
Yeah. So the diagram I have here is something I was trying to describe, which is like the life cycle of applications and how Remix and Next differ specifically in those ways. I thought I had a longer one. Oh, yes, I do. Cool. This is the app lifecycle. On the left is when the server gets the request, and on the right is like hours into the session. So we're on ping right now. Ping is built using Next.js. We have some server rendering on this ping page that fetches some data from server to put metadata in the head tag of the page so that when I share the link on Discord, it says this is Theo's channel that you're connecting to. And once you hit this line, once the response has hit the user, from that point forward, any changes that happen to that page are no longer the framework's problem, they're my problem. And if I want the data that gets server-side props past me or that a server component gave me or any other source of data, if I want that data to be able to change and for the component on the client to re-render, none of those, or Next.js does not help us here at all. Remix kind of does in the sense they have an action primitive, but the action primitives result in the way that it's built to work is to invalidate the whole route you're on and refetch everything, as you said, which kind of sends you back to the beginning of this pipe again. And I feel like all the solutions I've seen either ignore from this point forward or they create a cycle where it's like they go all the way back to the beginning when they hit this line instead in order to solve the problems that we're discussing here. And what I'm seeing that's really interesting is that SolidStart, despite having some of like the more simple primitives I've seen, is ignoring all of this and just going all the way to the end. When a user does a thing hours into the session and it invalidates one key, only that one key is invalidated and updated. And that is a thing that exists in SolidStart itself. It's not a thing I have to architect, think around, build around. This has the cost of if my update model does not align with the update model that SolidStart has, this won't work. But it comes with the absurdly massive benefit that I don't have to fight with my team about the right way to update data on the page when a user does a thing.
Yeah, and yeah, no, I think that covers it pretty well. The only thing is, and this is maybe where your team starts fighting, is someone could opt out to not using this and build something similar on top of Solid Query or whatever, and you could also just build your own system instead. So
that makes a ton of sense. It's not like you have to use this solution, but this solution that is built in for data loaded from a route, it makes a lot of sense to be able to invalidate that without rebuilding the entire page.
Yeah. I mean, again, what you know about Solid, it forces you to write stuff in a certain way. Like this is why it's not like it's hard to be agnostic, or I remember some people were like, why didn't you guys just use Remix? The Remix team was not going to make changes like this for me.
Absolutely. And I'm so cool to see like these parts. I almost want to like go through and make a list at the end that are like, here are the 3 things that SolidStart's doing very differently from other solutions. Because like to an extent, this article does a very good job of explaining both what SolidStart does and where the influences came from. But a short list at the top that's like, you know about Next.js and Remix and some of these other things. Here are like the core things we do very differently, and then like link to the different parts of this.
Right. And David told me to do that, and I said I didn't know how to do that in the 20 minutes before we released the article. So
of course, I will do a follow-up, maybe my own. I haven't written an article in way too long. I could see myself taking the time for this because it's just so cool. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're the next
in chat pointing out like when it comes to like quick on the fly marketing stuff, just ask me. That's the like I will gladly like write 3 bullet points for you if that's all I have to do.
Yeah, I know. I also didn't want to like we had a lot going on the last couple days.
Yeah, we did. It's been a chaotic freaking month.
Yeah. So we haven't even looked at actions. I just told you about them. If you scroll down, you can see how. So here is this first one is what I want to look at. This is the simple version of the action, right? So again, there's a difference here. I didn't tie it to the router, and this is hugely influenced by people. I love GraphQL. GraphQL is one of the like optimal things. When I saw that, I was like, okay, this is how we do an optimal pattern. And I'd already built something kind of similar, I told you, with Backbone ORM at the startup. But the thing that actually set me apart on GraphQL that was way better than anything I'd built was that there's a certain split between their query and mutation model, in that the query model feels like a graph, like a tree, and you're kind of like pulling data from all over and just fragments, jamming it all together. But the mutation model feels almost completely flat. Like sure, you can pull out trees out of the data and stuff and kind of share and do all that, but the actual mutations is just like a list of things. It's full RPC, and that's why I came up with the server functions. I wanted that RPC mutation feeling, so actions were in my mind. So the way that actions work is also going to blow people's minds. It's not tied to the route. It's not like export action. It's literally put as many of these in any file you want, not even router files. We don't care. As long as they're defined under like in a component or something like that lives under the route. We do need the route information at that point, but you can define these like inside your any component that's going to be under a route somewhere, which is every component, right? And this way you can pull the function out if you want, like not to mix your servers with your other stuff. But essentially, the simplest action here, like this to-do toggle, it's a tuple, but it creates a server action, and this code only runs on the server. So in this example, I'm just toggling a to-do, complete, incomplete. And then in this example, actually, I'm going to invalidate. Actually, that one probably should be a function, so like it's reactive on the ID. It doesn't matter. But my point is, whenever the ID changes, or whenever this action updates, it tells it to go fetch the to-do with the ID.
Wait, where does the ID come from here?
Because you're just defining what the action is, and that async function ID is the parameter that gets called. So like the toggle to do on the next line where it says mutate, like you're calling a function. It's like a server function essentially.
Yeah. So
and that
like here it makes sense because ID is the argument here, but where does ID come from here?
Yeah. That was if you picture this as in your component code,
so I create this in the component itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Then why would I put this here?
Well, I mean, you need it inside the server function, like because the await DB.
So this is actually where things are starting to get a little confusing then, because so like this, the closure breaks here.
Yes.
So if I don't pass something through here, I don't have it here.
Yes, that's what I was saying. The first argument to $sign functions runs only on the server. So this is the part that we've like been trying to play around with. Like when I write a lot of server actions, I actually pull all my functions out of my components and like just list them somewhere and then like inline them. Because for me, that bugs me. Nikhil, like he's madman. He just like sticks everything everywhere, like in his one file. He builds the whole app. So
my concern here is the super unintuitive difference in how this handles scoping versus how this handles scoping and closure. And these being next to each other with such different behaviors, even if you lint it, is going to be super unintuitive, especially since DB here, this is a thing I'm importing in order for this to work. So this is a closure break because I imported DB in the same file. I might have done something in the file to DB. At what point, like let's say DB has to be initialized. If I initialize it in the same file and then call it here, is that going to work or not? Like at what level does the code get included in the closure? What level does it not?
Module scope stuff is fine. So anything that runs top level in your file, you can use.
Yeah. So let's say in order for DB to work, it has to be initialized. I have to call db.init first, and then I can use it. If I called that I import db.init, and then I export this directly underneath, will that db.init state be received and understood here, or would I have to do that externally in a module and then import after?
I believe that would be fine. I think that the only like if you're inside your component and you write this code, like you're not going to put the db init in your component code. So as long as it's above, then it should be fine. Okay. Like as long as it's not in the component, like it's a top level scope. But you're right. Like this is why we tried to do the $sign. This is a place where like the convention piece comes in, that the first function in any $sign function is a server function, because there is this split, because the invalidation happens on the client, right? And the reactivity happens on the client. So this was like a convention where typically what we do is the first function is the server function, and the second argument is like the options or whatever. As I mentioned, you could do create route action and then manually wrap the server thing yourself and go server $sign, or make the server function yourself. This is like the topmost layer where I was hoping that this could streamline things. But yeah, I see where the concern is. That was when you have the server function, it's very explicit. You're like, this is it. When you have this convention of the first function is a server function, less explicit. So technically you do it either or right now, but this is probably one of these things we should be testing through beta and see how this works for people.
A crazy thought that could help cover a lot of this is, you had mentioned this should already be a function. If this was a function that's type was to be inherited from here, so the first argument, type T or whatever for the args for this, and then the same function type is used here, then you'd be able to key using whatever this passed, and still have that as like a source of truth. And then generally speaking, encourage that you do your best to not include things from like any scope in here other than things you just imported. But that's like the cleanest path I can see here. Once
Okay.
you allow developers to like instantiate these in components, and then the scope of what is and isn't included becomes unclear, I feel like that sent me down like a crazy like thought spiral that it didn't need to, that could have been done by forcing this to be a function typed based on here, and just saying no, like, could you take the content or the could you take advantage of the scoping here and grab something that you shouldn't within the closure? Sure. But just saying no, don't do that. Maybe have an opt out if you really want to, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think you're right, because like the convention doesn't say it by itself. People could get used to it like once they knew, but it's not obvious. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Big fan
I like
of
that.
brute forcing the mindset where you can. That's like there's a really big, like the mental hurdle here that I am struggling with is just understanding what isn't included. This is kind of like the burden as a React developer going into Solid in the first place, is what code isn't going to run, and when is it going to run. The majority of my Solid code only runs when the page loads and it starts. From there, things only run when they need to, but what is need to, and how do I as a React developer understand that, is a challenge. And what I'm seeing here as a person who's done a lot of like server code, I have a really clear distinction in something like TRPC, something like a server function, where this file only runs on server. Anything I do in here runs on server. When you blur these lines, things get complex, and y'all are working really hard to solve that complexity. And I think with like the getter examples above, you have. But once you add these invalidation patterns on top of that, that have slightly different scoping behaviors, it's this. I do not envy you for having to solve this challenge, but it's so cool getting to see how this is going.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And that was the thing, right? I had the primitives, and we really liked how explicit, but like you can understand, like this kind of almost streamlines it in a way that if you do know, it makes it a lot like it seems very powerful. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's tricky. And the last thing on the last line is important. Is again, this is the real. No, sorry, I'm still in the same example. This is the really important thing that Remix added to this. This is the most unique thing that Remix added. They added feeding the data that you sent to the mutation back through as temporal state. So we have optimistic updates the same way Remix does, where you like the first argument that you get back, it has a few different things on it, but you can like say like if it's pending, like show that it's already not completed or not, basically ahead of time. So you can write this logic where you can kind of like preemptively based on, like, this is a very simple thing because it's a toggle, so you just show the opposite of what it currently is, but you can do much more with this. This pending indicator is very similar to the Remix pattern in terms of being able to do the optimistic UIs.
Interesting. The thing that's confusing for me here is, again, scoping. Like, where does to do come from here? And
sorry, like this is cut out of an example. We actually have this example in the SolidStart repo. The to do would be like the for loop of to dos that you're iterating over.
That this invalidate is like invalidating.
I cut this like piece out, like essentially, like in an actual real example, there is this like one little server piece, which is the database, and then everything else is like your normal component. This example, I guess, is not the greatest thing to show what I'm trying to show, but essentially the to-do is just the to-do that you're iterating over in your to-do list. But yeah,
Good to know. No, it's like this blog post is super insightful, but when especially when you have been working on this for so long and looking at these examples for so long, your brain will autocomplete the thing you would scroll up to, but you can't scroll up to it because it's not here. I make these mistakes all the time when I share code snippets. I would love to work to make this a little clear. Also, like, I was so confused, like the relationship between toggling to do and this. I would almost rename this to like to do state or to do action state.
Yeah.
Just so it's clear what this is there, and then also clarify where this comes from, just to make it a little easier to understand.
Thanks. Yeah, for sure. This is the problem here. Okay, so
this is interesting though.
Yes, well, because I mentioned server functions can return responses, which means they can return redirects, which means we can take that same invalidating to do example, and the same submit function also just happens to have a progressive enhanceable form just hanging off of it. So essentially,
This is really interesting.
if you wanted to do it, like basically if you use form data, like, and yeah, if you try and use form and you don't use form data, you will get errors from TypeScript. But essentially,
That's
if
awesome.
your async function is form data, and you get some Zod action here, which I don't have in this example, but you can understand what's going on. You can actually build the form, redirect back to your current page or next page on the end of your, whatever you need to do. And if you write your thing in this kind of form post kind of mentality, and use stuff like hidden fields for your values and form submits or whatever, this will work with JavaScript turned on or turned off.
This is fascinating. Maple, where are you? I want your thoughts on this as the resident form expert, because this is super interesting. Because I feel like the way I've seen forms implemented before for stuff like Remix was almost inverse, where you start with the form and then from there you define the action and then you have to build that relationship yourself. Whereas here the action is the primitive, a form is inferred out of that primitive. It's like the chain of dependencies it feels way clearer here to me. And what I would love, I don't know like if this exists already or is even possible, if the typing from this would check to make sure all of the expected form data, like if I could type form data strictly somewhere, it infer and then throw a type error if we don't have all of the fields we need here. There's a lot of potential here that's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really cool. I don't know how anyone would do that per se. I'm not like super good at that, but that's the trickiest part. Like we built the actions first and then we added the form kind of after. And what's really cool again is you can put like my to-do MVC example is like in one page, it's a 2-page app. And I have like 6 actions in the one component with 6 forms. So it was incredible. We have something called a multi-action that I don't show here, which lets you do multiple things in flight. So like adding a to-do, and then we just, so you could just basically go make this multi-action to add a to-do, and then you just can click it as many times you want, and you can use the optimistic updates to show all the to-dos in the list before they like finish coming through, and error states and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's just a bunch of forms and that. And the coolest thing about this example is it's only 230 lines of code. It's about 60 lines of code more than the normal to-do example. And it's fully formed, doing the full thing with progressive enhancement. It wasn't like that too big of a shift. And yeah, that's the reason we hang them this way, is because you can have multiple on the same page. Our actions have nothing to do with your like routing.
I do really love that. Like this example here, you can clearly see how you would like put this in a component and then render a whole bunch of these. Like that makes a lot of sense. Super cool.
Yes, and then the invalidation triggers, and you get mostly, as I said, like a slightly more fine-grained sort of remix refetch along with it.
Makes a ton of sense. My one immediate question, seeing the return redirect here, obviously this makes sense if it's for like a form with no JS. Would I be able, if I am in JS land, like I have loaded the JavaScript, is this still going to run this redirect? And is there a way for me to write this in a way that works with no JS, with the redirect to reload the page, and with JS to do the granular invalidation?
Yeah, this has been one of the trickiest things for us. The biggest thing is if we're redirecting to the same route, it's not going to do the client redirect, so you're fine. It's just that we have to write it this way right now because we are looking into using special headers to kind of figure out if we can like have the default like reload action, or maybe don't use a redirect, maybe have like a reload action, like the make it look nicer. Because yeah, it hurt. Like it would be awesome if we didn't have to do the redirect for like the common actions instead of like the reload action, so to speak. So I think there's a place that needs a little finesse on the API side. The redirect, like ultimately this is how it's going to get communicated, but it'd be really cool if we can like hide that from you on the API side a little nicer, or like make it like more explicit or easier, so like you don't have to worry about the URL, for example. Like even just going like this is a refresh or something, like instead of return redirect / be like return refresh, and you don't have to worry about the URL or whatever. It would just make things like a tiny bit nicer, and it's an area that we're looking into.
Really
Does that
useful.
answer?
Yeah, that answers the question. I like that the redirect effectively is ignored on the client. If the client has JavaScript and is smart enough to do that, that makes this less big a deal. I will say that like I'm noticing the small number of abstraction leaks in SolidStart, and it's cool that like it also feels like as the further we go down the doc, the more they start to show everything that is this far abstract is going to have abstraction leaks. I like this one because this feels like the opposite of an abstraction leak. This is like a contained abstraction. Like this abstraction file routes, you now have this easy way to contain it, use it, or ignore it. Server
Yeah.
functions, this abstraction I really like. It's a primitive that I can export, import, and it roughly works as expected. Scoping's a little weird, but if you're good about only putting this at like top level, you don't put this inside of components. The behavior of this is pretty clear. Once you're nesting it and scope gets more complex, it gets a little more complex, but it's generally not particularly leaky. Once we get into here, we start seeing more things being called with specific behaviors, like the need to pass this a function that returns something that serializes the key that we get from here. You need to know that this has a thing called params, that we have an ID on params we can use here, that we can have to pass a function here, return it, and that becomes the key. And then we pass the server function, which we establish, like we understand this abstraction from before. But if we wanted to define this internally, do we have access to params when we do that internally here? Whether or not we do is unclear. How do we get the params to this server function? What's the right way to do that is now a more complex question. And as we get here, it gets more complex. You need to know that this key function object exists that you can return something like this in. And as we go here, it gets too much more complex. This was an example that like could be cleaned up a little bit. But here we're going way further. You need to know about form data. You need to like know that redirect does a thing. You need to know that you can call the form here and that this redirect behavior only runs in certain conditions. Even simply like redirect on Node.js or a name here that makes it clear that this behavior will only occur when there's no JavaScript on the page could help make this abstraction feel a little less leaky. But I feel like by the time I'm here, I have to know a lot more about how SolidStart is doing things versus before with the server function. Anybody at Ping right now, if I wrote this in our code base, would get it. By the time we're down to here, this is a lot harder for us to grok.
Right. And this is the interesting thing to me because this behavior in here, I mean, the wrappers are different, but the actual API, once you get into the action, is actually identical to Remix. Like everything inside. And I felt the same thing as you did, because it is an abstraction. It is something that we've chosen to add as an extra layer. And that's why I'm sorry, this is where, throw a little thing around, but this is why I was always like kind of questioning like the whole, you're just learning the web, thing, because it's just a redirect. I'm going to acknowledge, I don't think that's actually true. You know what I mean? Like, sure, you're using the web primitives, but you're using them in a way that's specific to the way your server works. So I think web knowledge is good. I think form data, knowing about form data is something, everyone should know about because forms are a real thing. But I'm not going to pretend that this is not an extra layer on for some people. And that's why we added it on. You watch this progressive, because I don't think everybody's going to do this or needs to do this. And I think that if you want to, this is good and you'll learn about that stuff. But it is actually, funnily enough, something extra, even though I've seen it being trying to sold as the foundation. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. I really like the point about web standards. I feel like web standards is used as an excuse for bad DX more often than anything. Like every time I hear somebody say web standards, they're not actually making something better. They're usually using it as an excuse to not do something the better way. It's like, oh, but this is web standards. Oh, we're using web standards. Oh, look at this doc from MDN that hasn't been touched in 15 years that doesn't know what an IP address is as your request object. And I just have found that to be a not great cop-out. And generally speaking, this is a frustration I've had with Remix for most of the time I've personally used it. I feel like I have to be an expert in MDN before I can be a beginner in Remix. And every time I run into a problem, I don't know, is this problem because I don't know Remix well enough? Is this problem because I don't know web standards well enough? Or is this problem because the relationship between those two things is complex enough that I can't find what I'm looking for right now? And I see this feels the most Remix of everything here, and I think that's why it's the least intuitive to me to an extent. Where before we were just writing functions and calling them, this feels like we're writing functions, calling web standards, and then building a relationship between the two that I, as a developer, have to understand how these things relate.
Exactly. And that, as I said, this was an intentional API
Mhm.
that's at the end of the chain. Like we've got to the end of the thing. If this sells you and you've seen this and you're like, this is powerful, this is what I want to do, then you're in. And if not, go
Then
use
scroll up the
TanStack
page a
Query.
bit.
Yeah, like exactly. Like I think this is actually a pretty, if you have the knowledge, this is a pretty sane take on like being a good web citizen, doing progressive enhancement, doing, building this stuff in a good, well-structured way. I will stand behind this.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I would never tell someone that they had to do this.
This makes a ton of sense. I think I was thinking this the wrong way, like initially, specifically because I got so excited by the toggle to do dot form, like the idea of our action defining a form, that this made me more likely to use forms in my code. But in order to do that, I then also have to understand the behaviors of code or forms, the way that form data is going to be handled, processed, and interacted with here. Like there is more buy-in necessary from me. I think what I'm more upset about is the amount of buy-in necessary to use a form rather than the amount of buy-in necessary to use SolidStart.
Yes, I'm hoping that's the takeaway. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is I think this is the end of the features that we've really been talking about with the beta. There's obviously little things here and there, but this is what I wanted to talk about mainly for the beta. There's one more thing to talk about, but this is what we're hyping and why we wrote this article about the beta.
Makes a ton of sense. Is there one more thing here? We're just getting started.
Yeah. Fred kind of, he pumped it pretty good. So we gave him a little quote tweet here. Because this is like everything I showed you is like the Svelte kit and Remix and maybe not Hydrogen, but like the Nuxt and like the state of the art of the web today. But we've been working on experimental features that you can use. You can go build apps with it. That is the web of tomorrow. So like we're not quite done yet. I know we've been going long, but we could show a cool demo, right? Or I don't know. Like it depends on what people want.
Where am I going?
Solid-movies.app.
That's solid-movies.app.
Yeah.
Oh damn, that loaded hilariously fast.
Yeah.
With images too. I didn't have this cache. I've never opened this page before.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean you can
click a thing.
Yeah.
That was pretty absurdly fast. And if I go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I guess like it's not 100% implemented, but we've got most things kind of good here. And actually go to the search. There's a bit of a delay on the debounce on the search, but we should try it on the sidebar down at the bottom. You can try it like just type, I don't know, something
there.
Okay. So everyone watching this, you can see that the browser window doesn't like re-fall. This is a single page app, right?
Yeah, I do see it loading every time I do a thing on the top.
But that loading isn't the browser loading. That's actually the loading indicator that I chose to use for this demo example.
So theoretically, we could hide that via CSS.
Yeah, because it's not going to unmount that thing because it should be at the top of the page. It should be like a global
I'll just find
loader.
this at the top quick and see if I can hide it. Yeah, solid island global loader.
Yeah. Can we hide that whole?
God, I need to hide this. Chrome loves to make things really hard to see when I increase my resolution. Display none. Theoretically now, when I switch pages, yeah, it just behaves the way any old Next app would.
Yeah. So the really cool thing about this demo, as we already just saw here, is this is actually using client-side routing with server-rendered partials and partial hydration. So this is actually islands with client-side routing. Some people call this technology server components. And I know that's gotten kind of a bad name, but I wanted to kind of show this technology a bit because I believe in future tech and I believe seeing cool stuff. And everyone saw their server component demo and they're like, how did Next get bigger? If you want, we should open the network tab and just see how much JavaScript this whole page, like you've been navigating around for a bit.
I just fully reset it, so I thought that'd be easier. So Command-Shift-Art it.
Yeah, and click the JavaScript specifically on here. And we should...
A lot of this is going to be because I have Chrome extensions. Let me do this.
Yeah. I was like, that's a lot of JavaScript.
There we go. 13 kilobytes transferred.
Yeah, 13 kilobytes transfer, and navigate around a bit because there's like most apps have like code splitting and stuff. Like let's go like click into one of those movies. Oh yeah. So we haven't loaded any more JavaScript, right? Because these are all server components. So this whole page you've been watching is 13 kilobytes of JavaScript. No matter where you're going here, the search will add a little bit because we needed to add the search.
14.2. Oh no, so much JavaScript.
Right, but the key part here is, I mean, this is super cool because even the search is super cool because it's actually reloading the same page without losing client state. Because you don't know this, but your input didn't lose focus while you were typing in that search, even though technically speaking, we're actually reloading the page around you. There is a very light DOM diff, thanks to Astro team Nate, who came up with the technology for this, for the DOM diff. But essentially, this is the reason that the progress bar wasn't disappearing or didn't come back when you're navigating around before when you hit it, was because this is using nested routing, like SolidStart, and we only swap out the portions of the page that actually change. So we do small swaps instead of doing the full page swaps you see in stuff like turbo links and like Rails. So we're only doing the minimal amount of change. And then in those change, we only load the minimum amount of JavaScript because it's server rendering. We don't need the JavaScript to actually render the page. Only we talked about this with Solid before. You only need the JavaScript to do the updates. Solid, like when you do a normal app with Solid, most of the code renders once and then it just does the fine grained updates. In this case, most of the code renders once on the server. And then we just need the small amount of JavaScript to do the fine grained updates.
I'm realizing this is the thing that GitHub needs to be rewritten in, like yesterday.
And the crazy thing,
the turbo links problem. Holy shit!
And the crazy thing about this is, do you know how big? Others built this app. I love this. Adi Asmani. I can share the link. I have this app in every single framework. Do you know how big the next version was? I don't. This is the official one. Know. It's like 190 kilobytes. I don't even know what they're doing. I'm sure we could make this in Next in about 100 or 120.
Somebody made a joke earlier about look at how many SolidStart apps we can fit into one Next.
Yeah, and in this case, it's about 15.
Yeah, that's absurd. Absolute absurdity.
So, I mean, this is really cool tech. It's still experimental. We're not settled on the APIs right now. Our APIs look a lot like server components. I've heard from people they don't like that. They don't like stuff like use client, but right now that's like where we're sitting at. But this is basically this is what server components are supposed to look like, and that's essentially what the deal is here. Yeah, actually, that article has all has our work on it. And the craziest thing is, anyone has ever seen my VComp talk, it's a talk of mine worth seeing. I actually show switching, not in this app, in a Hacker News app, between client rendered, like full client rendered app, server rendered Next style app, islands like Astro app, and then final version like this. And I change one line of code because it still uses the same patterns, the same data loaders, the same. We didn't change anything on you. You use create resource to load your data, the same data serialization. Yeah, see, here's the whole list: Next, Nuxt, Angular, SvelteKit, Lit, QuickCity, SolidStart.
This is fascinating. Shall we check out everyone's recent favorite QuickCity's version and see how much faster? Or God, that is so much slower.
I think this app they didn't fully implement it yet. QuickCity, it gets good. It gets decent Lighthouse scores on the load. The reason that this app is so awkward for them is because they did client-side routing. That's why I included it. If it was an MPA version of Quick, I think it would be actually quite good, but they did client routing. So when you go to the next route, it literally has to load all the JavaScript in like 10,000 pieces.
Yeah.
Right. That's why it's not the best demo, but I wanted to show like the trade-offs, if that made sense.
Yes.
And Lit is like 100 kilobytes. Like, you're not saving anything. SvelteKit is if we were using normal SolidStart and SvelteKit are like this. I think we'd be like 2 kilobytes smaller or something. But the SvelteKit version is going to be kind of similar. But this is like, yeah.
This is not regular SolidStart. This is absolute chaos.
Yeah, this is an experimental mode you can switch on, and we're still finalizing the APIs for. But this, like normal SolidStart, is going to be very similar to SvelteKit, maybe like a couple kilobytes smaller and kind of sit that. But this is potentially the future. And what's really interesting to me so far is that a lot of these primitive patterns seem to still work quite well. you know, we're still like figuring out how form posts and stuff work. But yeah, it's I wanted to show this because I mean, this is pretty cool, right? Like,
Yeah, this is super, super cool. I've been waiting for someone to figure out the bridge between MPAs and SPAs where it feels like an SPA, but still has the level of like network optimization that you can only do in a multi-page app.
yeah,
And I saw that I think Flamethrower is being made by Fireship right now, which is trying to be a modern TurboLinks. This feels
yeah,
like the inverse approach, but solves the same problem in a way where like the performance is just undeniable. Like navigating all of those sites, this one felt way better. Period. This is one of the fastest, snappiest feeling websites I've ever used. It's stupid because normally like the snappy feeling comes from the SPA, but the fast load times come from MPA. And this is the first time I've seen the best of both like correctly applied. It's weird. It's jarring.
yeah. And it's so weird because like maybe you forget about the load times and you're like, it's a single page app. And then every time I open that network tab and I go, oh shit, like I didn't like, how can there be so little JavaScript? I like, this is me personally, because I'm a performance guy. Every time I surprise myself, I actually, when Nikhil made the SolidStart docs in this, I didn't even look at it at first. I was like, I'm not going to look at it. I'm just going to use the site for a minute and like get a feel for it and not have any biases. And then I'm going to look and see how much JavaScript is there.
People love to comment how great the ping site feels performance-wise. Ow.
Yeah, I mean, size on JavaScript isn't everything,
Yeah,
and like but yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good demonstration of like, you know, where things could be heading. I'm always a little skeptical. There are trade-offs. Like it does take longer to respond with HTML than it does with JSON, but you know what I mean? Like the thing is you actually block the browser less. So like the guys from the Chrome team, when they saw some of these examples, they were like, one of the guys was like, I feel really bad telling developers they should like try and get their imp, like the next paint or whatever, interaction to next paint scores down to like under 200, you know, like this seems really hard and I feel bad for them. But then he's like, but then I tried your demo, Ryan, and the P75 or whatever was like well under 100 for everything. So then I don't feel bad anymore. The guy from the Chrome team.
Yeah. I think you're going to make Alex Russell's arguments against me much stronger in 2 weeks. So thanks for that, making my life harder. Yeah, I see people calling out the 64 megabytes of resources. There are videos playing on the page. There are multiple of them. There are multiple videos on the page. Y'all don't know how metrics work. I'm just looking at the JS size. It's the number here. Chill, guys.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. But yeah, so cool demo, right?
It's super cool. I absolutely love this. It's awesome knowing that like this is, because I've seen a lot of people trying to experiment in that direction. I haven't seen anybody apply it in such a compelling way where I can open the website and see it. I've seen so many like theoretically this new technology is going to make all of your like page navigations way faster. I'm like, okay, show me an app that uses it. And they shrug. They're like, oh, look at the example in our like homepage in the like playground. And yeah, y'all have a playground and I can do things in it. But you also have an incredible number of super interesting articles and examples and detailed, like the best examples of SvelteKit, the best examples of Next.js new loading patterns, the best examples of how to abuse Astro all tend to come out of you. And it's a really powerful strength when you're demoing something new like this, because you've already played with and made yourself familiar with all these other examples. Seeing the strengths and weaknesses and then highlighting them by doing your own thing. This is such a cool flex. This is such a cool flex.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be fair, like the thing is, I was okay with this one. It's hard when you make a benchmark because they're not all fair. The next version of the site's slightly different. We copied the Nux version. They're all like a little bit different. So you can't completely trust it. And if I built them myself, I could be critical of it. But this is the one that Google has that apparently if you go to like their like page and then they link it. So this is the demos that they've chosen to like promote. So this is fair comparison from my perspective on that. So I did that. I think I could build. See, like I think there's Astro in here too. Astro is also great. Astro here is 15 kilobytes. It's an MPA, but like we're basically the same size. Yeah, that's the code for it, and then the demo would be the next link. Yeah, you know. So yeah, look at this MPA. MPAs are fast if you do them right. You know.
Yep.
So
I did see, I thought they were doing some SPA stuff on this one. I thought they had some crazy JavaScript running to make this so snappy.
I think someone made a demo on top of this, but not
Ah,
not the one that they have here. Someone was doing the page transition API and doing it was a funny experiment because they don't support MPAs for page transition API, so they're faking a single page app with Astro and then putting it on top. But
interesting.
that would be more JavaScript and like more consideration, and it's kind of faking it to do it.
Are you
But
using
yeah,
page
like
transition API for the example in SolidStart?
no, this was just like I literally took a loader that I used in a code sandbox suspense demo that I had to do that thing across the top, and like yeah, that the end. Like it was just a very simple using all the stuff that we've been building.
Makes a ton of sense. Wow, we just
Yeah.
realized we've been going over 2 hours now. I didn't want to keep you this long, but there's just so much good shit to talk about here. Is there anything in particular we didn't touch on yet that you would like us to dig into for this release?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually no. I think the articles covered it, right? I wanted to show what we're doing today, what we're doing in the future, why stuff on web dev is really exciting. That for the release perspective, I'm pretty good, I think.
Just spam the blog post in chat if anybody wants to reference that and take a look at it more. There's also a tweet on both Ryan and my Twitter if you want to retweet that to boost additional to additionally signal boost for how awesome this stuff is. I think more people need to hear about this and see the awesome stuff that's being done here. This is a very exciting future for all of the web, much less just the Solid ecosystem. And I'm genuinely so pumped to see what you guys have been working on. It's super cool.
I'm so glad to finally have the chance to come on here. This has been long overdue. I just never knew when the right moment was, and I think the key to it is there might never be a right moment if you always wait. And I mean, both of us today, like we're sitting here drinking our teas and stuff, being at Jamstack.conf, like talking over like loud music and stuff for hours. Yeah,
Yep. We're both recovering our voices and releasing crazy things. Funny enough, I'm actually using a new feature that we're shipping at Ping. Probably tomorrow, maybe Friday, but really hoping for the tomorrow launch. We have a new, even simpler way to bring guests into your stream where it's literally 2 clicks. You don't even have to open OBS anymore to get them there. And I'm so excited to share this more. It has made my setup way easier. The reason we were late today was not my usual configuring OBS. It was actually that my power brick for my camera exploded, and when I tried to unplug it, almost electrocuted myself. So y'all are lucky I'm alive today. Actually, you're lucky both of us are alive today after the car crash.
I mean, that's crazy in itself. We were in an Uber, and it just so happened we were like last at the venue, heading over to dinner. So I guess like Matthias, Netlify CEO, was make sure everyone got a car, and we just happened to walk out last, and so we all got Matthias, Theo, myself, and I can't remember. We got in this car in this Uber. It was an Excel or whatever, and
Yep.
we're just driving to the restaurant, right? And I kid you not, we're just driving normal, and the car right in front of us gets T-boned. Like we're just driving forward, and just like right in front of us, sideswiped, and the whole
Yeah, it was pretty bad. The car that was hit had no passengers in the back seat, so they were all fine. But our car was entirely passengers in the back seat. We would have lost the CEO of Netlify, Ryan, and everyone's favorite streamer, also Ryan. But like that would have been bad. 10 seconds earlier, and that would have been a tragedy. But instead, it's just a weird joke that we have now. Like we almost died on the way to dinner at Jamstack.conf.
yeah, no, it was insane.
Yeah, it's been a chaotic 3 days, honestly, with absolute chaos. Happy that we were finally able to have you on the show. It has been way too long. Are you down to do a quick Q&A, or do you want to head out? Totally understand if you just want a piece.
No, we can talk stuff, and that's the thing. Like so much cool stuff is going on. I'd love to talk and questions and stuff. And I can't. You know what? I can't reveal anything yet. We'll just wait. But I'll say that I had some great conversations at Jamstack with Tanner and with Fred, and just like a lot of other people. So really cool stuff going on. A lot of cool new ideas. It's crazy how when you talk to someone and they say something back to you in like a slightly different way of something you thought about before, and then it's something like, maybe that is viable. So yeah, I'm very excited for the future. I know I'm baiting you all in chat, but it's fine. I'm not leaking anything just yet. But yeah, I'm down for questions.
There was one question about adapting. This was really early on. This is from Jamin, who is the head of things over at Infinite Red, which is the place that you go if your React Native app isn't fast enough or you want to move your app to React Native. They're like the agency for building React Native apps really well. And he's seems to be very excited about Solid, which makes sense because he's a MobX user. He created a
Of
MobX
course.
state tree. He was asking what it would look
Okay.
like for somebody today to start adopting React or to start adopting Solid in a React app that they've already built, or more importantly for him, React Native apps.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess we're going right there. Yeah. This has been a question, and the one that I've been having the hardest time on, because Solid does not have React compat. So we're not going to like pull the Preact type thing or Inferno where we're just going to swap the app on you. But reactivity is universal. It's a language. Today, what that means is if you want to try to use some of Solid's patterns, and unfortunately, I haven't updated the library to work with React 18 and concurrent stuff. There is a package called React Solid State, which is basically like I looked at the MobX React thing and like basically was like, okay, how do I do the same thing in Solid? So it's basically lets you use Solid's reactivity to drive React components. That might be one way to start kind of playing with the patterns and the code. Other than that, yeah, you basically got to migrate at leaf nodes, find opportunities, but stuff like native, obviously, we don't have solutions for today. So in like, or that's not 100% true, but we don't have React Native. React Native is incredible. We have like web stuff like Capacitor and Ionic, and people playing stuff with Tori, and I think there are a few native options, but they're not like React Native. Someone did actually try and make a wrapper over React Native that uses Solid, but I haven't seen progress in that project in the last few months. So I'm not sure there. So maybe the best thing you can do in that case is just get into the reactivity and use something like React Solid State.
Yeah, React Native is going to be the scarier one there for sure, simply because like Solid likes to tie things to the DOM itself for references and updates to an extent. No?
No.
Hmm.
Oh man, this is something. Can I show you easily? Maybe I could share a playground. The thing is, first of all, we have a universal renderer. That's why Nikhil was able to make like Solid 3. He ported a bunch of Paul Henschel's libraries over to Solid, and he's been posting recently like all his like fun 3D demos he's been doing. But like even before that, the cool thing is if you don't use lowercase DOM elements, like div, like anything in the lowercase, we don't import any DOM APIs. Like if you use create root instead of render, which you can, zero DOM APIs get imported by Solid, and you can like build a whole component tree. Like reactivity and the components and all that work completely independent of the DOM. The only magic is that DOM compilation specific to the lowercase letters. And I did port that so people could make stuff like React 3, so they can like go make like blank mesh whatever as lowercase letters. But generally speaking, Solid, it doesn't have a virtual DOM, but in a sense reactivity is its own tree, or you can wire it that way as its own tree. So we're actually not that tied to the DOM as much as people think, which is actually a little bit different than Svelte actually, which is why when they came up with their 3D thing, they like had to make like a whole different package. Before I even made custom renders, people had kind of hacked stuff together like using Canvas, like Pixie integrations where they use just solid web and just literally just played with it. And then once I got the custom renders, Nikhil went crazy. He made like Solid Ink, he made Solid 3, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of crazy stuff coming out of him in that sense. I actually almost used Solid Ink for some stuff just because it had a better template than Ink did.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't played with it too much, but he did come on my stream one point and just like he'd only been working on Solid for a week at that point when he did that. He like came in and he said, "Oh, seems cool," and he just like went, and he was like the first person to really use the custom renderer seriously, which was good because I had no clue what was good or bad about the custom renderer. For that, I literally looked at Vue and I was like, okay, let's do what Vue does.
And it's interesting. Like I'm so used to custom render equaling like VDOM output somewhere else, but custom render is very different in your use case, but still works roughly the same. So,
right. That's the interesting thing because when we use the custom renderer, what we do is we end up transforming the props and then building crate effects or like nested effects. So in the end, you still get to write the code in a way that's completely oblivious to like Solid's reactivity. in those elements, because you just call the function like set property or whatever, and then the reactivity is on the outside. Very similar compilation to what we do in the DOM, and then you can go, yeah, when this is created, I create this, and when this is updated, I update this. And I actually on stream used Solid's custom renderer to make a very simple DOM API and ran it through the JS framework benchmark one time, and it was actually fun. It was the same speed as Inferno at the time. Inferno, which was pretty cool, and actually it says a lot in terms of VDOM versus non-VDOM kind of considerations, and the fact that like some of Solid's wins on the DOM come from very specific DOM APIs like cloning nodes. It's a trick we grabbed from Lit. Versus creating elements one at a time, but they all have their individual little costs and trade-offs, but honestly maybe it doesn't even matter that much for you, like the 0.2% or whatever.
Once you have 50,000 elements, that difference makes a lot of sense, but when you have 50 elements, not as much. So makes a lot of sense.
Sorry. Yeah.
And this is why like doing a gigantic table with thousands of elements in React sucks so hard, and doing it in Solid makes so much sense.
Right. Oh man, I had a stream with AG Grid, and then like it was so cool seeing Niall like play around with it, and he actually did the comparison where he actually benchmarked the salt. Like he's doing something cool. It's similar to Tanner in a sense, but he ships the finished products instead of saying like kind of build on this agnostic core. And the thing that's cool about his approach is he embraces the framework, like in that like when he makes a table and you use it in React is actually rendering the table. And he does this so that when you extend it and add your own stuff, it's not like a bunch of separate React islands. It's all part of a single app. So you can get the best performance and the best like setup out of it. But yeah, obviously in that scenario, Solid did very well. It's basically the same as vanilla, or actually beat his vanilla implementation on Create. I told him I'd look at it and help him improve it, because vanilla should always be the fastest.
That's great. I am starting to see more good questions coming in. One that I think is really important. I'm trying to like jump in front of like two eagerly recommending things that are really early. SolidStart's in beta. The framing that Arthur gave for the question is great. He said, on a scale of 0 to GraphQL subscriptions, how much are we going to bleed on this edge if we use this today?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. Yeah, that's a fair question. The APIs are relatively stable, except for the kind of stuff we talked about, which is small renaming stuff. I'm pretty happy because we've used all the use cases. Right now, there are a lot of bugs in the repo. Maybe not a lot by a lot of people's standards. I'm just used to, like, if you've seen the Solid repo, I keep that stuff clean. Like, it's very rare that there are like more than like a handful of open bugs. SolidStart's been harder to nail down. I think there are a lot of bugs. I think it's kind of configuration type stuff, because we're using the same primitives and stuff that we already have in the library. And there is that, like, a few things where like things come down, but largely we're still finding the best ways to work with Vite in some scenarios and deal with like not random, but like interesting problems like ES build thinking that our components are React and stuff, and like mono repo configuration not working properly on Windows, and that kind of stuff. We're spending a lot of time in that area. So, but to give you kind of like, I'm like the most hesitant to tell someone to use my stuff when it's too early. So that's what, like, I'm probably more pessimistic than most people like should be. Like, I know a lot of people where if their project was where SolidStart is right now would be like, ship it, use it in production. I've been working on this since February 2021 for thing, and we thought we were basically in beta since August, but just little bit. But yeah, we've been using it for small apps, sample apps. It's still early, but I mean, as I said, I'm the last person to try and push you towards something that you won't be 100% satisfied with. But I know that most people in my place would tell you to go use it right now.
For what it's worth, I've been asking Ryan for a while now to let me know when SolidStart is ready for me to use, because I tried and the docs were like, there was some pages missing that I really needed. The like TypeScript wasn't giving me the input I needed, and I was getting confused. To be frank, I am stupid. I am not as good of a developer as a lot of y'all think I am. I'm good at thinking through like the higher level technical problems, how things work together, the relationships between them, stuff like that. but I'm not very good when it comes to actually like writing the code and debugging a thing I don't understand. I'm good at finding that understanding as a result of that, which is why when I tried using SolidStart and I stumbled a whole bunch, Ryan's response was a very quick and eager, "It's not ready yet. I'll let you know when it is." And I trusted him on that. And sure as hell, last week he said, "Okay, I think it's ready. Can I come on the show now?" It's like, "Yes, absolutely." We scheduled it for today, the day after after JamStackConf, because now Ryan thinks it's Theo proof enough. So take that as you will. The reason the beta came out today is the team has decided SolidStart is now Theo proof.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, and we wrote the docs, and there are docs now. They're not the best docs. We need more help and contribution. That's one area. But yes, we're at a point now where if you hit a problem, there should be like at least like, oh, this is what the API is. Like we had nothing, like basically nothing before. So and Theo still got pretty far with basically nothing. So
yeah, and now we're all the way here. This is fantastic to see. One other question that I saw, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Someone was asking the viability of abstracting the server or $sign plugin to be used by any other Vite projects.
Yeah, I mean that seems interesting. Stuff with the request response model, and it's similar to the questions like file system routing, and if we could do that. Like my first piece that I usually look at is like, can I use this stuff in any solid project specifically? Like the file system routing might tie into the router, but the server module probably could be used in anything that could accept, the request response middleware kind of approach, the web version, the MDN version. So I don't know. Nikhil might have some thoughts.
It probably could be used by anything. He just said outright. That's cool to hear. Somebody should definitely play with that. I'm sure that they're out of the like 600 or so people still watching, that some of y'all are smart enough to go prove whether or not that is viable. I'd love your thoughts if you do manage to go do that, and let me know how you feel if you do. Definitely we'll keep an eye out for people hacking on that. There was one other question I wanted to get to. Let me find it quick. What's the next big focus of SolidStart after this beta release?
For SolidStart specifically after the beta release, we're just trying to like stabilize in terms of like get the bugs down. I mean, we're working on the smaller features, and we're working on the experimental stuff. I would love if the experimental thing I showed you today was just something that was part of the release. I've said multiple times that it wasn't going to be part of 1.0, but then what happened was Nikhil's did so much work in lightning time that maybe there is potential there. But mostly it's about stabilization. It's mostly being able to handle more use cases. We created this so that people could use Solid, make it easier to use Solid, and that's what the focus is. More people use it, more bugs we find. I know it sounds like crowdsourcing bugs, but I mean that's what betas are, and we get a stable product. That's what I care about. I want to see people using this. I think even like I'm always future forward, so that's why I want to show the experimental future stuff. But even the offering we have today, I think is very competitive, in this space. So
I very much agree. I am surprised how far along this is, considering how little like it's been discussed publicly. Like the only big public time we have talked about SolidStart was during the drama way back. But beyond that, y'all have like really kept quiet and sit in the corner and made this as good as it is. And this is another, like, I know I keep making the music analogies, but a thing I think a lot about is what I now refer to as the Young Lean effect, where Young Lean was a somewhat controversial new hip hop artist that was a 16-year-old kid in Sweden. And he got into hip hop through watching American music and paying attention to the American scene, also like importing like albums and games and things from all over the world. He was just nerdy about the way this music was made and the culture around it. And in his isolation in Sweden, where he had no like distribution, outreach, or way for people to hear his stuff, he just, with his little crew, got really, really good at making music that was very different and not quite the way people thought of it. And if he had shown every step of the way how different the thing he was doing was before it had gotten to that point of quality, we would have just shit on him immediately and it never would have happened. By the time his music was good enough to escape Sweden and make it to the US, it was also good enough that despite it being different, we couldn't talk shit. If we had gotten it too early, we would have discarded it because it wasn't ready. And even though the ideas there were valuable, we couldn't see the value because the execution wasn't there yet. If you wait until the execution gets to the point where you can't poke holes in it, the value prop becomes way clearer. And I think that SolidStart is the young lean of frameworks.
That's interesting. I mean, Solid itself is actually that in a sense, because I spent 5 years before I 1.0'd it. Spent so much time working on those primitives, making that pattern to the point now that like it would have got criticized a ton early, because like knockout and not MobX, but like knockout and stuff like reactivity in the past, people would have ripped that like in a minute. And I just kept on doing what I was doing and slowly brought people in. And we got to this point where now when people look at Solid, they're like, these are the primitives that we want to adopt. So yeah, for me, doing the similar thing with SolidStart, I don't know if it was intentional. It's just like what I was doing. I don't like showing stuff before I can back it up. So sometimes this is bad because like you want to get in the conversation early, and make sure that, at a certain point, like you don't leave people's mind share. But I'm hoping at this point, after, doing a few of these things, people realize that like, if I'm being quiet, it probably means I'm working on something really cool.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I have seen this from you just as a person that's been keeping an eye on your stuff for so long. And the fact that you've spent the time you have on Solid really does show the quality of the primitives. But it's crazy to think that like you could have shared that more aggressively at any point. But because of external factors like hooks combined with the effort you put in to make the quality apparent, the result was very different. And it's cool to see the world noticing Solid now more than ever before. I see one last really good question that I think is a good note for us to end on. Do you think SolidStart is the best way to start learning Solid today?
That's a great question. Yeah. And it's one that like I'm a little bit on the fence on, because I don't want your first experience to be to hit a bug. So for me, I feel like the Vite templates are still the way to go at this exact moment. I think during the life of the beta, this will change, because you can actually literally SolidStart does everything the Vite templates do. It has the clients. You can just go no SSR, and you get SSR plus. Actually, you can even make API routes and have like a fully client rendered page if you want to do something funny like that. But like, what I was trying to get at is that like, until like the bugs and like the stability is there, I don't want that. Like first impressions are so important. So I'm gonna say not quite today, but that's the intention of this. You can build every Solid project with it, and as we get better, maybe split out the Vite projects or the Vite plugins. We might even get to a point where, if you like really don't like SolidStart or something, I mean, like you could just like build your own SolidStart using our Vite plugins. Some of them, not all of them, or whatever. So yeah, I think if you're on the front of the curve, now's a good time. If this is your first time in here, use our normal like dget on the Vite templates.
I saw our good friend Parasocial link or drop a command to run a Deno Solid template.
Yeah, I mean, he's been doing great stuff there. I didn't even realize we'd actually succeeded at that. Like, I knew we run on Deno, and obviously that Solid app, Solid Movies app that you saw is running on Netlify Edge, which means it's running on Deno deploy under the hood. But to my understanding, that template actually works. That template actually works. Like fully building with Deno and stuff too. Like it's actually like a full setup, which is cool. And I remember I had one other link too that someone had made. I don't know if this is, I haven't looked at it too closely, Theo, but someone actually posted this in your Discord, and I didn't look at it. And they were trying to, I think, sell it to your audience, so to speak. So maybe, I don't know if this is any good, but I figured it might be
Open it up one sec. Cool. Here we go. I can share the link in Twitch chat quick too. Twitch, pop out, drop that there. This is create JD app, which is somebody using, this isn't SolidStart, right? This is just Solid like Vite.
No, that's SolidStart.
Oh, SolidStart? Awesome. So it's a SolidStart with TypeScript in Zod built in, but also the ability to use Prisma, TRPC, Tailwind, and the Upstash rate limiter being built in is really cool too. Actually, I should hit up Upstash about that. They should pay me if they're or more if people are using it that deep in. Love you guys, Upstash, but this is actually really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly saw Create T3 app, and they're like, what if we could build Create T3 app on SolidStart instead of Next?
To be clear, I've actively encouraged this in the community. Also, this has 42 stars already. Good shit. Well deserved. I love this. Create T3 app is the set of tools and modular opinions around the core piece for us, which is currently Next.js. Could we theoretically make Create T3 app support other bases? Theoretically, yeah, sure. But that's so much effort and so much more maintenance for the Create T3 app team, where what I'm seeing with all of these new projects spinning up is that you can take like the lessons learned and the work done by the Create T3 app team and apply that in something that uses like an entirely different core, but a lot of the other pieces are still reusable. I've seen this with Create JD app. I saw there was a Svelte version of this as well somewhat recently. People are really taking the opportunity to create better initialization tech to get started on the right foot with projects.
Yeah, I thought this was cool regardless. I hadn't played with this combination specifically. I haven't played with Create T3 app specifically, but I saw this and I was like, this seems like on topic with the kind of stuff that you guys talk about on stream quite often.
Absolutely. I'm realizing there's one other spectrum that I'm not going to bother drawing right now, but I'm realizing where like on one side there is performance, like what can we do for the best possible perf, like Marco land. And on the other is the best possible DX. Like, how much can we compromise in favor of the user or in favor of the developer, which is Flutter? And React's a little further from that, and it keeps going up and down. One of the interesting things you said about Solid, and I know we're going to like rabbit hole a bit here. I think this is the actual last thing. One of the interesting things you said that when we were last chatting is that you've recently realized people do actually prefer the DX of Solid to the DX of React due to the reactivity mental model and how like the developer experience works around it being simpler to follow in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've always liked it, but I always assumed it's because like my tip, because I'm a little bit more on the, I've been doing this a long time. I'm a control freak. I like having all those elements. But I remember a couple polls on Twitter or someone talking about it, and I think Svelte is very well known for its DX. I was seeing Solid actually come up in that conversation, in the same kind of range. So, it was like Svelte and Solid were like kind of switching 1 and 2. Like it was considered comparable. And it's interesting because it wasn't something that I wasn't sure that it actually conveyed outwards like that. I didn't realize people were that happy with it, and it seems to be the case.
I've definitely felt that myself as a user of Solid, that I've been consistently surprised. Like even the dumb example I gave at the beginning where you just moved the state out and now it's global. Like a lot of those patterns a lot of it's like the shock of, the things that I spend my time in React just don't exist here. But the other is sometimes you get shocked when a component doesn't rerun and you expect it to. And like if you have an effect where one of the dependencies is called under a condition that isn't hit, it doesn't retrigger. Like there are different unintuitive things, but I find that those things are both deeper and often clearer when they go wrong. Where in React, the failure doesn't happen in your code, it happens in the like virtual DOM and the lifecycle. So like the bug you're looking for isn't necessarily the thing you wrote, it's the result of the thing you wrote. Whereas in Solid, it feels much more like my code is broken here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I was hinting at this earlier when we were talking about the stores and the nested routing and all like that whole thing with the data fetching. And I said I had no choice. I don't know if this is a good thing, because this is part of the question with if the framework or the library kind of pushes you to write things in a certain way to be optimal, or otherwise like you really know it's not like good. Is that good DX, or are you being held at gunpoint? But I guess I don't know, maybe it isn't like that. Maybe you just kind of get in the flow of things and then everything makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that there's a unique level of flow that Solid has provided me. I've enjoyed it a lot, and it's really cool to see more and more reasons to adopt it and more interest in the framework. Any last things you wanted to say before we wrap up?
I don't know. Yeah, we've been going a long time.
We're almost 3 hours in. This has been nuts. I didn't think either of us had this in us today.
I know it's been a long week, but yeah, let's
It's only Wednesday.
yeah, I know. That's the crazy thing. Well, I was working on that demo, like the movies demo. The images weren't resizing, like for the responsiveness. So I was like doing that very late on Monday or Sunday night. I can't even remember anymore. Anyways, yeah, check out just a typical shout outs. Obviously, solidjs.com. All the links are there. But yeah, Discord is where we live. So yeah, definitely check out our Discord. The links are all off solidjs.com.
Make sure you're following Ryan on Twitch if you're not already. I just shouted him out again with the fancy new little shout out feature, so you can check that out. I also saw that one of our moderators, I'm pretty sure it was Glassy, appreciate you a ton, Christian, made a chat command that links to his YouTube and Twitter as well. Be sure to follow him on all of those things. He is, if you liked this in the depth that we went here, you're going to love his streams because they go way deeper. Also, he actually responds to chat and interacts. So if you're a chatter that likes to ask questions and be part of a conversation, go to his stream, not mine. I'm just here to shitpost. Regardless,
thank you.
This was super cool. Thank you so much for coming out for this one, man. I know it's been a crazy month plus at this point, and for you to still find the time to come on the show for our usual Dev Wednesday means a ton. Thank you so much as always.
I can shout out one more thing. Not that it's probably gonna matter a ton of people here. I'm going to be at Modern Front Ends Live in London next week, so you can check out my talk there as well. And I'm actually doing JetBrains Day tomorrow as well. But that's the end of it. I feel like I've been everywhere, not everywhere, but it's been a long road. So yeah,
November conference season's been nuts this year. It's like thing after thing after thing. My poor roommate was at the GitHub Universe today, and I have a ticket. I didn't go. I have too much shit to do.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is how people find out about new ideas. And in the case of like Jamstack, maybe new ideas are formed. So
yeah, that was so cool. Once you pull those people together, you never know what is actually going to happen. But I was so pumped with all the conversations we had, both the last 2 days as well as here today. Thank you again so much. I'm going to, you can peace whenever. I'm going to go find somebody to raid because I just want to chill after this. You can hang out for that too, either or, whatever you feel like. No hard feelings if you just ditch though.
Yeah, no, it is it's 5 o'clock, which is my time to go get some dinner. So I will catch you all later, and thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man, for stopping by. See you in the future. Peace, man.
Yeah, see you.
Cool. Let's give Kisa a raid because we love her. She deserves a viewership. Make sure there's somebody who I absolutely owe a raid to before then. Why is this no longer? Oh, there's sort options. What the fuck? Why would I ever want those? Here, this is what I want. Much better. Cool. Yeah. Let's go hang out with Kisa. Definitely deserves it. She's been killing it lately and has been super, super busy. So it's good to have her back on stream. Pop out. Chat. Raid. Kisaka. Toriyama. Thank you all again for stopping by. This was an awesome show. We'll hopefully have a video out tonight or early tomorrow. I'm behind on the uploads recently, but yeah, life's been a little chaotic lately. Thank you all for hanging out. Thank you all for chilling for this weirdly timed and super long stream. Appreciate each and every one of you. Stay in touch. See y'all next week. We got some fun guests coming. Actually, I can announce it now. Yeah, fuck it. Lee Robb on Wednesday next week. So if y'all want to be here for the Lee Robb interview, make sure you are. I am so hyped. It's going to be a great show. See y'all next week. Peace, nerds. Be here Friday. Hitting that raid now. See you guys next week. Peace.